In a critical situation, who does a person turn to in their thoughts? And who do they get help from? Believers say that God helps everyone. Atheists think it is some kind of supreme intelligence. Mages are certain of the existence of both God and the devil. So, who is God? Where to find God? What is the difference between knowing God and believing in Him? In search of answers, people are left to their own doubts, but they still go, both to church as well as to mages, just in case. Many atheist scientists, in the process of scientific discovery, have become the most devoted people to God. What irrefutable proof of God's existence have they found for their minds? Watch the 31st episode of the Kaleidoscope of Facts, Scientific Proofs of God's Existence. It's time to bring the truth back to people. Organized by participants of ALLATRA International Public Movement.
Indeed, the question of God's existence has concerned people throughout the development of humankind, because the answer to it determines a person's worldview and destiny. This is a very wide topic, and today we begin a series of programs. We are pleased to welcome you to the first part of Kaleidoscope of Facts, Scientific Evidence of the Existence of God. Today we'll have a look at the origin of the universe and life on Earth.
Scientists have calculated that our universe is 14.5 billion years old. The age of the planet Earth is 4.5 billion years. Lots of animal species lived on Earth, from the smallest microbes to megalodons. Geological evidence represents that life on our planet abruptly arose and abruptly disappeared. While scientists still cannot come to a common conclusion when human beings had appeared on planet Earth, an estimate spread significantly from 6 or 7 million to 40,000 years.
Yes, David, not only are scientists unable to arrive to a common understanding of exactly when human appeared on our planet, but there are still debates about how we came to be here and how life appeared on Earth in the first place. There are many opposite points of view. Some believe that we are descendant from apes in the process of evolution. Others that we are originated in the image and likeness of God, and we have His spark of life inside us. When had the moment of separation between science and religion begun? Who got benefits from that? And what has led it to? You will find out about it in our episodes.
This episode is organized by volunteers from all over the world. Our program is broadcasted on thousands of media platforms and simultaneously translated into 17 languages. While preparing this Kaleidoscope of Facts, we have interviewed many scientists and we have studied many scientific articles and publications. In our research, we relied on the knowledge presented in the books by Anastasia Novick and in the videos with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. We begin our study from what scientists do say about God. Let's watch a video.
The history of our universe is 14 billion years old. Today's scientists are trying to understand what caused it. Was it an accident or a wise plan of the Creator? Since the age of 10, I have not received a single convincing proof that God exists. I don't know why some scientists believe in Him. They're in minority though. Where did the idea of God come from? That is a very interesting question. I, for example, am sure that the origin of God can be modeled on a computer. The very idea of God is a product of the human imagination. I am an atheist, regardless of the fact that I am a physicist. Among physicists, I can also find believers, so to speak. But, of course, there are more atheists among scientists. The basis of religions is faith. The basis of science is knowledge.
The truth is that we still do not know the physical process, the pathway whereby chemicals turned into life. Nobody knows how just stupid atoms blundering around can turn into an information management system in which you have both digital and analog information being stored and processed.
Now, for a long time, you see, if anybody had asked me what happened before the Big Bang, I would have given the conventional answer, which is the Big Bang was this singular state when all our equations go haywire and time and space, doesn't make any sense. Even the question before doesn't mean anything, you see.
If you run the cosmic movie back into time, you come to a moment, perhaps 15,000 million years ago, in which all the matter in the universe was touching in, if you like, a point. And a key unanswered and perhaps unanswerable question is, where did all of that matter energy come from? What was before that? And if it was made from nothing, who made it? And who made the maker?
We are given one universe. Why are you asking questions? Let's assume that we have a closed universe. If you take the universe, organize it the way you think it would be natural, here it has just started. Let's make it some kind of curvature that you would consider natural. And people did the math. It turns out that a typical closed universe would have to last about 10 to the minus 43rd power of a second. 1 billion, a billion, a billionth of a second, and another thousandth of a second. There are equations that describe the material world, and there are equations that do not describe the material world. There is a certain set of rules. This is the information by which material objects will be created. It contains no energy. It is like a matrix of possibilities. It exists before matter came into existence. Information exists before matter existed. Who creates this information? I have the only answer. Absolute nothing creates it. That is, the absolute nothing that manifests itself as everything. And what we study with modern science is just a consequence of this plan by which it is constructed. So information is the first thing that the Lord God does if He intended to build the universe or material world.
And one thing we know from evolutionary field studies, if you've got a terrestrial mammal with an adult body size greater than 3 kilograms, that mammal species will go extinct before it can evolve into different species. So it tells us that all these large body size mammals are special creation events.
I don't know human origins, where we came from. I have no faith that these are our ancestors. They dig up bones and sometimes they find that next to some ancient men, say, or humanoid creature, there are the bones of a modern man. It turns out that man and ape are in opposite relations. The apes are downcast humans, losers. They are the people who climb the trees, not the people who were our ancestors.
It turns out that there is a homonymic part to the workings of the genetic apparatus, but it has been ignored and obscured since the work of Francis Crick himself. And why is that? Because if we admit that there is such a linguistic difficulty called homonymy, we must acknowledge and understand the workings of our genome as an intelligent system. And this, according to materialists, from genetics, from biology, is not good. It leads to the idea of God.
But what makes life seemingly magical, what makes it so different from just any old complexity, non-living complexity, is the way it organizes and manages and stores information. So I focus in on that information storage and management aspect, and for me the true problem about life's origin is I call that the software of life. It's the coming into existence of that software, not the hardware stuff.
The question of whether God is bound by the laws of science is a bit like the question. However, until recently, it was thought that the laws would necessarily break down at the beginning of the universe. That would have meant that God would have had complete freedom to choose how the universe began.
Some people wouldn't agree with you to this universe creation mechanism because they'd say quantum mechanics only applies once you have a universe. That the laws of physics demand that there actually be a universe before. Or nothing has to be like nothing. Either you have a blank which is like nothing at all, or you have something. Logic requires that one or the other of these things be the case.
Einstein was the first to realize that the violation of the classical principle of causality is related to the existence of superluminal velocities and causes time reversal and leads to the existence of instantaneous signals, which he also has a bearing on in some scientific works. So indirect evidence of the existence of God is superluminal and instantaneous transfers of information from one point of the universe to another. Do you understand? And it is very important. And we now find, theoretically and experimentally, that such information signal transmissions exist.
And we now have observational evidence that that's correct to about 15 places at the decimal. Then space and time must have a beginning. Space and time must be created, which implies that there's a causal agent beyond space and time that created our universe of matter, energy, space, and time.
God did create the universe about 13.7 billion years ago, and of necessity has involved himself with his creation ever since. The purpose of this universe is something that only God knows for sure, but it is increasingly clear to modern science that the universe was exquisitely fine-tuned to enable human life.
After watching this video, I remembered a very good rhyme just in this topic. In one window, look two. One saw the rain and mud. Other, green foliage ligature, spring and the sky is blue. In one window, look two. And indeed, how often do we look at the same thing and see exactly the opposite, if there is no understanding of the essence of what is happening?
You know, I think the audience might have a question. How can you observe the same object or process and see something totally different? I propose to make a small test to understand. Which way do you think the ballerina is spinning? Look carefully. Some will say clockwise. Others will say opposite. But what is really going on? It's a flat picture that changes shape on a flat surface, so it can't spin. We see spinning because the brain fills in the details, like in the video below. If a person does not have an understanding of the process, then there may be a conflict. Where is the ballerina spinning? And if the conflict is inflated, there may be even emerge opposing parties of the left spinners and the right spinners. Aren't conflicts and contradictions like these that arise within science when, after observing and studying the same thing, scientists come to different conclusions because they don't know the truth? For example, as in the theory of the creation of the universe, we give the floor to Jonathan.
Thank you, David. The universe. Behind this word, there are hundreds of thousands of galaxies with billions of planets and a variety of life forms. We are told it all came from the Big Bang, but it wasn't the case always. The Big Bang concept is only about 100 years old. This theory replaced creationism, according to which our world has a creator, God, the creator. Later, many other theories emerged that either refine the Big Bang theory or had a completely different concept. The authors of the new theory were often actually very famous people, scientists. But despite this, their theory did not become very popular. In recent years, there has been a talk of a crisis of cosmology. This is due to the fact that the data obtained from telescopes do not coincide with the calculated ones. And the more accurate the instrument becomes, the larger the deviation becomes. In May 2004, New Scientist magazine published an open letter on cosmology, Cosmology Statement, signed by 35 astrophysicists and physicists, starting with that the Big Bang theory has not been proven, that it is predictions are refused by astronomical data. Among the co-authors of the letter, in addition to Eric Lerner himself, were some well-known scientists who had major contribution to astrophysics and astronomy, such as Hermann Bondi, Thomas Gold, and Jayan Narlika. Since then, more than 200 more astronomers and physicists have signed this open letter. This leads to questions. How did the Big Bang theory emerge in its first place? The main evidence in favor of the Big Bang is two facts: the constant expansion of the universe and the relic radiation. So how did scientists determine that the universe is expanding? This picture shows that light reflected from an approaching object takes a blue hue, and from a receding object takes a red hue. Then, when studying the cosmos, astronomers noticed a pattern, and it was that the farther the galaxies, the greater the red range is in the spectrum. This is the so-called redshift, which was theoretically predicted in the general relativity by Einstein and was confirmed in 1929 by Edwin Hubble from observation of many galaxies and their redshift. The redshift showed that galaxies were flying apart. This was followed by the assumption that all matter was once compressed into one point. In this picture, you see the relic radiation. As for the radic radiation, it is assumed to have originated from the primary plasma of the early universe. It had a spectrum peculiar to the black body with a temperature of 3 Kelvin, which is very close to the absolute zero. It should be understood that any explosion propagates energy in all directions equally, but precise measurements made in recent years have indicated that the radiation background that resulted from the Big Bang is neither homogeneous nor isotropic. In other words, not equal in all directions. The expansion of the universe is a scientifically proven fact which cannot be said about the Big Bang. At the moment, quite a few questions have accumulated from advocates of the Big Bang. The first thing that is confusing is the distribution of galaxies. In any explosion, a void is formed in the center and matter is distributed in the surrounding film. However, if we look at the distribution of galaxies in our universe, where we see that there is uniform distribution and absence of emptiness. All galaxies, by definition, are part of the meta-galaxy. All stars are combined into galaxies. Astronomers have not yet been able to detect stars that are not part of a galactic structure. Galaxies are organized into a large-scale lace-like structure with many voids. For example, in 2008, a group of Israeli scientists led by Adi Zitrin and Noah Brosh discovered a group of 14 galaxies like bread strung on a string of dark matter. Additional research have revealed another interesting point. After about 1 billion years of inactive existence, these galaxies began forming stars again, about 30 million years ago. This is unexpected because it is believed that only the interaction of galaxies with each other can start the process of star formation again. These same dwarfs remain isolated from their neighbors. More recently, in 2020, the American astronomer Lior Shamir of the University of Kansas made the statement based on his data that if the universe has an axis, it is not a simple axis like a merry-go-round. It is a complex alignment of multiple axes that also have a certain drift, meaning the galaxies are not arranged chaotically, rather in a strictly defined order. The researcher was interested in the question in which direction spirals galaxies rotate. They can rotate both clockwise and counterclockwise. And if the universe is truly homogeneous on a large scale, there should be an equal number of galaxies. So there should not be a vast region where an homogeneous cosmos populated predominantly by left or right star system. However, Shamir obtained unexpected results. When viewed from Earth, the number of left and right star systems differ by about 2%. This difference may seem quite small. However, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of galaxies. Lior Shamir was interviewed on our channel and talked about his research.
Conclusions, then what we see here, first of all, we see that the universe is not completely random as some of my colleagues tend to believe. There's something that we call the cosmological principle. It's a working assumption that has not been proven, But that is the working assumption for almost all modern cosmological theories, and it means that the universe is completely random. Wherever we are in the universe, or whatever direction we look at in the universe, we're going to see about the same thing because everything is randomly distributed inside the universe. And my research shows that that's not necessarily the case. The universe has a certain pattern. It's not completely random, and we see it also in other probes right now. It's not just my research that shows it. We see other probes that are showing that the universe is not random. Specifically, what my research shows is that not just the universe is not random. When you go deeper in the universe, which means back in time, we see that the universe was even more structured, the structure was even more defined when the universe was younger. And that leads us to the idea, to the contention that when the universe started, it didn't start randomly. And perhaps what the data shows, that it is possible that the universe started when it was rotating as it started, which means that perhaps an external force was acting on the universe when it started. So one of the explanations could be that there could be something more than the universe. There could be maybe multiverse, many universes, could be other things that it's not, I don't want to make any conclusions right now, but it looks like, and it shows that there are other forces that were acting on the universe when the universe started. If the universe was completely random, then we expect to see an even number, more or less even number of galaxies that rotate clockwise and galaxies that rotate counterclockwise. Should be about the cosmic microwave background, which is radiation, very old radiation, starting just relatively shortly after the Big Bang. One interesting thing about the cosmic microwave background is the cold spot, CMB, what's called the CMB cold spot. So we expect that if the universe is completely random, we expect the cosmic microwave background to be randomly distributed. And we see some evidence that it's not randomly distributed. And the source of it is still in discussion. So the universe is made of clusters and filaments. And galaxies within filament also tend to rotate, to be aligned in the way they rotate. And again, we can assume that because they're gravitationally interacting with each other. The thing is about my research and a few other studies that were done is that those galaxies tend to be aligned in their spin direction, even if they're way too far from each other to interact gravitationally. What does make them spin in a uniform way? That's a mystery. And there's no explanation, and that's why we need more research to understand these things. Here are just 3 telescopes, in comparison of 3 telescopes, but all telescopes, all of those 3 show the same thing. I show that the galaxies, the spin direction of galaxies is not randomly distributed. There is a pattern in that, and the pattern is such that it makes an axis. So the spin direction of galaxies are distributed in the universe in the form of a certain axis, and the universe might be oriented around an axis like that. As we have more instruments, we can see more, and that drives our curiosity further. What is this place that we live in? What can we know about it? And what other information can it tell us about it? And if you talk about ancient manuscript, then the history of human history has been always like that. We've always wondered about our place in the universe, and it changed based on the instrumentations that we had. So if we thought that we have just one planet, there's just one planet in the universe, which is the Earth that we live in, and there's just one star, which is the sun. There's just one sun, and then we learned that the other stars that we see in the sky are suns, and then we thought that we had just one, and those stars make a galaxy. We learned that they make a galaxy, and then we thought that the galaxy, that's the universe is made of just this galaxy, and that wasn't that long ago. That was at the time when we have good technology, like we had cars and airplanes and radio and TV, and we had all that technology, and we believed that the universe is made of just one galaxy, and that was an argument made by pretty clever people who insisted that we have just one galaxy in the universe, although we have telescopes, strong telescopes, and we could see thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of galaxies in the sky, and we insisted that these are not galaxies, these are clouds inside our galaxy that may look like galaxies, but they're not real galaxies. And we insisted that the universe is made of just the Milky Way, and then it changes when we learn that these are actually our more galaxies. The universe is much bigger than we thought in the past. The universe, again, surprised us, because one of the arguments to say that what we see in the telescope are not galaxies is that if we believe that these things are galaxies, that means that the universe is too big. That would be crazy. But who defines crazy here when we talk about the universe? And the universe, again, surprised us and taught us some humility. And if we go to the ancient manuscripts, so these people, maybe they did not have the instruments that we have today, but they had their own intuition. These are theories and none of them has really been proven. We don't have one proven solid cosmological model. Even if we say that sometimes we say that we do, or we claim that we do, we had those models in the past, and we learned that they were not even near what the universe is.
Thank you, Professor Shamir. It's really interesting information that the galaxies in our universe are not arranged chaotically. In other words, this arrangement cannot be the result of an explosion. The second point, you have to understand that the Big Bang theory says that all matter was compressed into a point of incredible density, but no one talks about how a state with such a high density arose and where this matter came from in the first place. The third point that confuses many scientists is the different speeds which galaxy moves away from the center of the explosion. Nearby galaxies move away slowly, but distant galaxies move away quickly. This can be seen in this picture. And it is a paradoxical fact that acceleration of galaxies lacks logic. Since the velocity of an exploded pieces of matter must decrease as they move away from the center of the explosion. The fourth point, the initial explosion must have set all the matter in the cosmos in motion along the radius from its center, and according to the principle of conservation of angular momentum, no spiral motion would be possible in it. However, we know that everything in the universe moves in spiral. The universe, galaxies, planets, and even the electron. Therefore, the beginning of the universe from the Big Bang seems completely impossible. It is like the fragment from an exploded missile. Instead of flying in different directions, would begin to slow down and still rotate. The fifth point, it is unclear why at the explosion the matter that was flying apart did not spread out at the level of an atom before galaxies were formed from them. One more point. The development of life is in many ways contrary to the basic law of physical world. For example, the second principle of thermodynamics, according to it, all processes in the universe go in the direction of entropy, increases chaos. Yet, life does not degrade. On the contrary, it develops. And this process has been going on for more than 13 billion years. Therefore, life exists contrary to the second principle of thermodynamics and in accordance with a predetermined program. From what we have heard, it becomes clear that, in fact, there are two views on the origin of the universe. The first view states that the universe was as a creator. The second view states that the universe acquired this form as a result of certain physical laws. However, first of all, the physical law of development had to be created by someone. They could not appear from nothing. The second of these laws are based on a certain constant. If we change slightly, life in the universe becomes impossible. Scientists have concluded this. Thank you for your attention. Next, we will hear about the fundamental constants of Sergei Sukhunos, candidate of technological sciences and cosmologist. I suggest you to watch the video.
This idea of the Big Bang existed in the 20th century until a certain point, until in general scientists came to the conclusion that this exploding universe sooner or later is to collapse. But at the same time, there came up a curious puzzle that stirred the minds of most of the world-leading scientists in the middle of the 20th century. This is the so-called problem of large numbers. What is its essence? The point is that the ratio of some Coulomb forces, say, and other forces' length, masses, and times gave the same number, in fact, 10 to the 40th power. And this number, 10 to the 40th power, was so impressively mysterious. Why? Because it did not come from any theory. They started solving this problem and found out that since the constants are the basis of this problem, let me remind you that our world is made of protons, electrons, and so on. That is, it's an atomic world where there are constants. The mass of the proton, the charge of the proton, the mass of the electron, all of these are measured with the highest degree of accuracy, with the highest possible degree of accuracy. On the slide you see that the mass of the proton is one integer and further a dozen or two digits and 53 in a period. Then these 53 can be continued indefinitely. It turned out that all these particles, charges, etc. are very precise, and it is their combination that gives the exact number 10 to the power of 40. But they began to think, maybe these constants are just not everlasting, maybe they change. They started checking them, it turned out that the constants do not change. And when they began to change these constants in theory, that is the mass of the proton and so on, they suddenly discovered the paradox that led to the formation of the anthropic principle. Maybe you've heard something about the anthropic principle, or perhaps you haven't. Astrophysicists, the world's leading scientists, came to the conclusion that the universe was planned and developed with the initial assumption that life would appear in it and that its crown would be human. The creators of such a picture of our universe explicitly or indirectly imply the actions of the supreme creator of our world. That is, this conclusion was drawn not by some theologians, but by the leading physicists of the world. This is the so-called anthropic principle. Why? Because the universe is arranged in such a way that the slightest change in these constants leads to a change in processes, and life becomes impossible.
Hello, dear friends, and thank you, Jonathan and Sergei Ivanovich. So, the permanence of the value of constants is of key importance to us. And so now we will try to understand this question in more detail. So, an important feature of the structure of the universe is that the laws that exist in nature are mathematically precise, universal, and interconnected. The question, how did nature appear as we observe it, has been asked by many scientists, from the time of antiquity to Einstein and Heisenberg. One physicist, Freeman Dyson, writes, "The more I examine the universe and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe is, in some sense, must have known we were coming." So, in other words, the laws of nature seem to have been created in such a way as to guide the universe to the origin and maintenance of life in it. So scientists have called this understanding the anthropic principle. That is, the anthropic principle says that everything in the universe is designed to give birth to life. This principle has been popularized by scientists such as Martin Rees, John Barrow, and John Leslie. The laws of nature and the properties of matter are mostly described by different equations. The basis of these equations are constants, the fundamental constants about which Sergei Ivanovich Sukhanov told us earlier. Well, currently, all known physical laws are based on the fundamental constants, and all fundamental constants are well defined. Well, these usually include the following parameters: speed of light, gravitational constant, Planck's constant, the mass of the electron, proton, and the charge of the electron. So also vital parameters are the electromagnetic coupling constant, the level of entropy in the universe, and even the half-life of beryllium-8, on which the formation of carbon and other chemical elements required to life depends. So the fundamental constants are not deduced from any more general principles, and there is currently no theory to explain why they have certain values, meaning the fundamental constants simply exist as a fact, and scientists do not understand why they have such values and how they are obtained. The only thing that science can do is to measure them. On this point, John Barrow, one of the physicists who worked on the anthropic principle more than any other, said, "This is the holy grail of fundamental physics, and it means the numerical calculation of none of the constants of nature has ever been done. So far, the only way we can know their values is by measuring them. This seems unsatisfactory." So scientists have calculated that if the value of even one of the fundamental constants is changed in the most insignificant way, the universe cannot exist. At first view, it might seem that nothing significant would happen if a constant, for example, Planck's constant, is changed, even slightly. But the analysis demonstrates that changing even one of the fundamental constants while the others remain unchanged leads to the impossibility of existence of the basic stable coupled states, nuclei, atoms, stars, and galaxies. So anyone who knows physical equations can verify this. There are several amazing correlations between the constants that characterize the universe. They were even called coincidence of large numbers, which we also heard about from Sergei Ivanovich. In equations and in physical theories, large numbers of the order of 10 in 39th to 10 in the 44th power are often found. And Paul Dirac was the first who paid serious attention to this specific feature, because these coincidences indirectly indicate the correlation of parameters of the microcosm and macrocosm of the universe. Many famous physicists such as Eddington, Dickey, Howell, Carter tried to explain these coincidences, but the observed numerous coincidences of large numbers do not find an explanation. They just are. One of the coincidences connects the Hubble constant, h0, that is the expansion rate of the universe, with atomic constants, for example, the mass of proton, electron charge, Planck's constant. It is known that Planck's constant is the basic constant of quantum theory describing the physics of the microcosm relating the value of a quantum of energy to its frequency. On December 14th, 1900, Max Planck, at a meeting of the German Physical Society, proposed a formula for the spectral power density radiation of an absolutely black body with constant h. The idea was that any energy is absorbed or emitted only in discrete portions, quanta. Based on this constant, scientists conduct spectral analysis of matter and explore both the macrocosm, galaxies, black holes, the universe, and the microcosm, that is, everything that cannot be seen with the eyes. And that is,
the expansion rate of the universe, the Hubble constant H, is an observable process, but they observe it using spectral analysis, whose equations are based on the energy frequency of the quantum, that is, Planck's constant. So the question arises, how to explain this coincidence if the difference between the size of the nucleus and the size of the universe is enormous? Is it purely random, or can it be predicted theoretically? John Barrow thinks it is possible only for an inhabited universe, because only due to such parameters of constants are those forms of life possible that are characteristic of our universe. In 1986, he co-wrote with Frank Tipler a book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, in which he stated, "The universe as it exists was created for the purpose of generating and supporting observers. Observers are necessary for the creation of the universe. An ensemble of universes with different fundamental laws and constants is necessary for our universe to exist." So let's start with the first statement. According to modern theory, at the beginning of the formation of the universe, very high temperatures helped the fundamental particles to unite to form atomic nuclei, and then the simplest atoms, hydrogen and helium. These are the lightest elements in Mendeleev's periodic table. So theoretical and observational data point to the formation of these elements in the first 3 minutes after the Big Bang. Information about the abundance of elements in nature is received from spectral analysis of the sun and the stars, as well as cosmic rays. The picture shows the ratio of the number of nuclei in the universe at different values of mass. Here we see that more than 99% of the mass of all atoms in hydrogen, 92%, and helium, about 8%. The variety of the rest of the 100 elements and their isotopes fits within a fraction of 1% of the mass of the matter of the universe. It is considered that they were formed later in the process of synthesis of the first two, hydrogen and helium. Naturally, the formation of other elements took some time, especially carbon, which is a core of biological life. Astrophysicist Robert Dicke noted this feature and in 1961 highlighted that the age of the universe, as we now see it, cannot be accidental. If the universe was 10% younger than its current age, there would not be enough time to create other elements than hydrogen and helium. This means that even the planets would not be formed, let alone biological life. You can see on the screen the periodic table showing the supposed time of formation of each element. So, if the universe was 10 times older than it is, most stars would be too old and would turn into white dwarfs, which means that stable planetary systems would come to an end since the star swallows all nearby planets before turning into a white dwarf. An important point is that today, the power of the nuclear interaction is strong enough to maintain the stability of the hydrogen nucleus. Thus, transformation of hydrogen into helium does not occur. Any increase or decrease in this interaction will convert hydrogen into helium. Without hydrogen, the existence of water and long-living stable stars, which is necessary for the emergence of life as we know it, is impossible. So it means that our basic physical regularities, as well as the numeric values of the fundamental constants, are not only sufficient, but also necessary for the existence of matter. In other words, if you change something in physics, then not just minor quantitative changes will occur in the physical picture, but its foundation, the existence of basic states, will collapse. For example, If you slightly change the size of one part or a screw in a mechanical watch, then it will not work. Well, this example is not accurate, but it is used just for understanding the fine-tuning of the entire system, which is our universe. There are two explanations for this fine-tuning. So, some scientists state that fine-tuning is the evidence of divine design. Many others suggest that our universe is one of many parts of the multiverse, which our universe happened to have the right conditions for the existence of life. Well, in fact, none of the major scientists today claim that fine-tuning was simply the result of random factors operating within the same universe. John Leslie, a leading theorist in the field of anthropic principle, wrote a book, Infinite Mind, where he proves that fine-tuning is best explained by divine design. He says he's not impressed by individual arguments that the examples of fine-tuning, but by the fact that those arguments exist in such abundance. If then there were aspects of nature's workings that appeared very fortunate and also entirely fundamental, he writes, then these might well be seen as evidence, especially favoring belief in God. Well, theory of the multiverse is put against the idea of divine design, but it seems obvious to me that the existence of a multiverse does not remove the question of a divine source. Cosmologist Martin Rees is one of the most famous proponents of the multiverse, and he said fine-tuning can be explained by the hypothesis that there are many universes with different laws and physical constants. And it just happens that our universe belongs to the kind of universes that are suitable for the emergence of complex mechanisms and consciousness. Rees attracts attention to the fact that these ideas about the multiverse are highly hypothetical and need a theory that coherently describes physics of ultra-high density and structures of elements of additional dimensions. We learned interesting information on this topic from the video about the spiritual world with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. Let's watch a fragment of it right now.
The theory of the multiverse implies that multiple universes which originated in one point exist in parallel. This is really so. Even in this territory, in the space where our universe is located, there are a lot of parallel universes, a different frequency. That's it. I mean, the fundamental frequency. We'll return to that. What are multiple multiverses in modern understanding? According to our modern understanding, our universe originated from one point. There is matter, there is antimatter, there is a different frequency of vibrations and interactions, and they just don't mix, but everything occurs sort of in parallel with a slight deviation. In other words, in parallel to this universe based on modern theories of the multiverse, there is also Tatiana everywhere. Let's say there are dozens of these universes and dozens of Tatianas in these universes. In our universe, in our three-dimensional reality, Tatiana is sitting here asking me questions, and we are talking with her and with you. Whereas somewhere in a parallel universe is the other way around. Tatiana is sitting here, I'm asking her questions, and she's answering.
Or she's sitting behind the camera.
Or she's sitting behind the camera, or she's busy with something somewhere, well, somewhere else. She hasn't arrived yet.
Right.
That is a multitude, yet it is still Tatiana everywhere. It's very funny and silly. Why? Because there is such a notion as individuality. That's impossible. There are universes and they develop in parallel, but I'll put it this way, not only people are not alike, even galaxies are not alike. Yes, there are various forms of life, the laws are approximately the same. There is spiral development, well, everything develops according to the same patterns, but even galaxies are not similar to one another. You know, I'll give you an example for understanding. It is very simple. We take a black background, a speed camera, and a spoon of dry flour. We toss it and shoot on the speed camera. We will toss the spoon 1,000,000 times, and 1,000,000 times we will have a completely different picture. That is, the flour when falling down, the suspended material will produce a completely different pattern. Whether we toss it 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times, we will never achieve absolute sameness. That's the essence of multiverses. Yes, they are multiple. Yes, they exist. No one denies that. And in fact, we can already prove some things experimentally. But they have their own life. And now a question arises. How can a lot of universes originate in one and the same point?
Several universes.
Right. Just to make it clear, everything depends on the fundamental vibration.
Resonance.
Absolutely right. In other words, what is this universal resonance or fundamental vibration, universal vibration? It is what works at a certain frequency. Meanwhile, our entire matter feeds on one energy. The entire universe consists of one energy. I understand there are numerous questions now. No, we have a great number of emanations that originate from this kind of energy, which has begotten everything, and everything is created upon it, and thanks to it, everything exists. Only afterwards, a variety of those kinds of energies appears, and this variety produces completely different resonance. Therefore, each of us has his or her own shape. If we look at the micro level of our DNA and RNA as an information structure, we will see the difference in resonance, not only the position of proteins and molecules, but we see the difference even in that very resonance of interaction in our DNA, say, of my body and Tatiana's body. They will work at their own frequencies. They will resonate with each other, but they will never work jointly. Why? We would not be even able to create conditions for her DNA and my DNA to work in one resonance, otherwise they would mix. This is very simple, but if we look at what is located much deeper, beyond the quantum limit, we will come to that energy which works at the universal frequency, that is, we will come to the universal resonance. It was called in different ways, but from time immemorial it has been called the powers of Allat. In other words, a single drop of Allat begets our entire universe. So this point is partially true, that the universe emerged from one point.
Thank you, Igor Mikhailovich. So, all matter in our universe works at a certain frequency and is fed by one energy. It is a single resonance or fundamental vibration, and single vibration. And the anthropic principle is just a consequence of this phenomenon. Remember, I said we can only observe the fundamental constants for now, because scientists have not yet found the beginning from which everything comes. Our science is the science of observation, and it just observes the fact that all matter in our universe comes from one type of energy. In an interview, Stephen Hawking, an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, and astrophysicist, said, "The overwhelming impression is of order. The more we discover about the universe, the more we find that it is governed by rational laws. If one liked, one could say that this order was the work of God." Thank you for your attention, and I pass the floor back to the hosts.
Thank you, Alexei. Thank you, Jonathan. The main point I made from the above is that the universe was created according to a certain inviolable laws. Everything in the universe is perfectly ordered and regulated by someone. And most importantly, the universe was created for one purpose, so that life could exist in it, so that human beings could live and develop in it. And it turns out that a human being is the main creation.
If everything in the world is ordered, then how does the diversity of living forms arise? Evolutionists claim that this is due to natural selection. But is this really so? Let's watch the next video.
Man is the only animal for whom his own existence is a problem which he has to solve. Eric Fromm.
What a pity! So little time and so many interesting things. I have to hand in my work tomorrow. The origin of life on Earth. Basic theories. Refutation of creationism as a possible theory of the origin of life on Earth.
Until the middle of the 19th century, world religions had exclusive rights to deal with issues from the realm of human ideals. Creationism was the prevailing view in people's minds about God's creation of the universe and a human being. The year 1859 became a turning point. Since then, science and those who conveyed the results of research to the general public would take control over the ideals of millions. Thereafter, the theory that determines the worldview of a significant number of people will be the theory of the random origin of all life on this planet, and even humans, by the blind path of evolution. This hypothesis was put forward by Charles Robert Darwin in his Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection.
It's quite right. All that's left is to pick up modern concepts that describe evolution. That would be enough to disprove creationism, because science must have gone a long way since Darwin. Probably I'll find all the necessary arguments very quickly. Let's get started.
Life appeared on Earth more than 3.5 billion years ago. It's difficult to designate the moment more precisely. Today, there are 8 scientific theories of the origin of life. First, panspermia. Second, spontaneous generation. Third, primordial soup. Fourth, chemical evolution. Fifth, black smokers, underwater volcanoes. Sixth, protocells. Seventh, RNA world. Eighth, endosymbiosis. First, panspermia. The hypothesis about bringing life to Earth from other cosmic bodies has many authoritative defenders. The great German scientists Hermann Helmholtz, the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, the Russian thinker Vladimir Vernadsky, and the British physicist Lord Kelvin stood on this position. But whatever their arguments, the question remains: how did the life that came to us from space appear? Second, spontaneous generation is the spontaneous origin of highly evolved living matter from non-living matter. For example, flies were thought to originate in rotting meat. This theory of spontaneous generation, formulated by Aristotle, was dominant in medieval Europe. It ceased to exist after experiments of Louis Pasteur, who proved that even fly larvae need parent flies to emerge. Spontaneous generation should not be confused with modern theories of the abiogenic origin of life. The difference between the two is fundamental. Third, primordial soup. This concept is closely related to the classic experiments conducted in the 1950s by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. In the laboratory, scientists simulated the conditions that might have existed on the surface of the early Earth and obtained some amino acids, sugars, lipids, and precursors of nucleic acids. Fourth, chemical evolution. The theory describes how simple organic substances evolve into precursors of life under the influence of external factors. The basic concept is water-carbon chauvinism, where water and carbon play a key role in the emergence and development of life. Fifth, black smokers underwater volcanoes. According to this hypothesis, life could have originated in the depths of the ocean, where there was enough minerals, heat, and energy to develop. Underwater volcanoes may have been the germs of life on the planet and served as the basis for the development of unique ecosystems. Sixth, protocells are hypothetical cells that appeared in the early stages of life on Earth. They may have consisted of droplets of hydrophobic lipids. This protocell contained media protected by a membrane for reproduction of RNA or other molecules. Seventh, RNA world. The RNA world hypothesis suggests that RNA may have been the first molecule of life capable of chemical evolution. RNA macromolecules can store, transmit information, and catalyze reactions. Studies show that RNA molecules can self-replicate and evolve. Eighth, endosymbiosis. Life on Earth originated through the fusion of different organisms. Chloroplasts and mitochondria, respectively responsible for photosynthesis and for oxygen consumption, are endosymbionts. Bacterial cells that have been taken over by other organisms and left to live within them. This hypothesis has been proven and extended. Today it is recognized as a repeatedly proven theory.
Interesting. These are all modern scientific theories on the origin and development of living matter. That's a lot. Perhaps they have common features. I'll try to combine the theories according to the stages of development of the evolutionary process and show how new living forms developed at each stage. But first, it's necessary to separate the theories describing the place of origin of life from the ones describing the process itself. What does it matter where life has originated from, the universe or right on Earth? The process must be the same because the laws of creation are the same everywhere. Therefore, I can discard the first two theories right away. These are panspermia and spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation was rejected after the experiment of Louis Pasteur. And I will not consider panspermia because there must be the same process on Earth as in space. If I understand how it happened on Earth, in the same way it could happen everywhere in the universe, so what's left? So, three basic steps will remain. The first stage, random synthesis of organic molecules from inorganic chemical elements. This includes theories 3 and 4, the primordial soup and chemical evolution. The second stage, synthesis of the central information structure of living matter and emergence of primordial cell. These are theories 6 and 7. The third stage, evolution from protocell to human. This is the theory of endosymbiosis and, in fact, Darwin. That's all. I have a theory for each stage. Now I just need to collect information and creationism will be finished forever. And why do we need God when science has explained everything? And don't let Alex bother me with his faith anymore. I'll mail him this term paper and I think we'll solve this issue forever. I will start with the first step. Random synthesis of organic molecules from chemical elements. This is the key step of evolution. After that, everything will go like clockwork. The simplest cell, multicellular organism, protozoa, fish, and so on.
An issue of the origin of life on Earth is being focused upon a lot. Everyone knows that the material basis of life is organic compounds. Therefore, one of the key problems in the issue of the origin of life is chemical evolution. That is the formation of complex organic molecules from simple inorganic compounds, in other words, abiogenic processes. With the help of radiospectroscopic methods, it was proven the presence of bricks of living matter in open space. Those are such complex organic compounds as formaldehyde, cyanoacetylene, and formamide. This suggests that Earth may have contained organic compounds even at the stage of its formation. Most theories begin with the first stage being the formation of complex organic compounds in the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and on Earth's surface from inorganic components. This chemical or abiogenic stage preceded the biological stage, which in turn began after the emergence of cells. The transformation of stable inorganic molecules into organic molecules requires energy. According to scientists' assumptions, the source of energy at this stage could be solar radiation, including ultraviolet, radioactive decay of unstable isotopes of the Earth's crust elements, electrical discharges, lightning, collisions with meteorites, and volcanic processes. It is also believed that it was photochemical processes, chemical reactions that are initiated by the exposure to electromagnetic waves, that led to the conversion of inorganic compounds into organic ones in different media. Assuming what these primary conditions might have been, scientists tried to recreate them in vitro. Laboratory experiments proved the possibility of synthesizing organic compounds, including amino acids from mixtures of simple inorganic compounds when exposed to an energy source. For example, American biochemists Stanley Miller and Harold Urey exposed different gas mixtures, H2 plus CH4 plus NH3, circulating over boiling water to electric discharges. As a result, urea, methylurea, some organic acids, and only 6 amino acids were found. At least at certain stages of evolution, there was a possibility of areas with an increased concentration of these simple organic compounds. However, the mechanism of synthesis of more complex organic molecules, either in the primary atmosphere or in the experiments described above, has not been definitely ascertained.
So, well, the mechanism is not ascertained. Does it really mean that I can't explain the very first step in terms of exact scientific proof? That's too bad. All the subsequent steps of evolution hang in the air. So what do we have? Some scientists say that ultraviolet light contributed to the origin of life, but ultraviolet lamps kill bacteria. Not for nothing they hang in all hospitals. And other scientists say that, yes, ultraviolet is destructive, so life originated in the depth of the ocean near volcanoes, black smokers. Strangely, they don't have a consensus. Well, let's say it is clear how the primary building blocks of life, the amino acids that make up proteins, appear in this primordial soup. But how do you bridge the gap between the amino acid and the protein, which carries the hereditary information encoded in DNA? Who taught proteins to store and transmit this information? What made the bricks assemble into a factory? That is the question. That is the question.
Now, the most popular theories are that life emerged on Earth under special geochemical conditions, either near hot springs at the bottom of the ocean or in mud pots near volcanoes. However, the existence of organic matter is an important but insufficient factor for the origin of life on Earth. In order to fully explain the theory of the origin of pre-biological form of life, it is necessary to solve the problem of exact replication of protein structures. Why is it so important to solve this problem? Because proteins play a major role in the regulation of metabolism in various cells in the organism. That is, the existence of a living cell without protein structures is impossible. According to the theory of academician Alexander Ivanovich Oparin, a further step on the way to the appearance of protein bodies could be the formation of so-called coacervate droplets, molecules, water envelope of which acquired clear boundaries and separated the molecule from the external environment. Coacervate droplets could also arise during simple mixing of various polymers. In this case, polymeric molecules were self-assembled into multimolecular formations which were capable of absorbing substances from outside as open systems. When catalysts, including enzymes, were introduced into coacervate droplets, various reactions took place in them, in particular polymerization of monomers coming from the external environment. Due to this, the droplets were able to increase in volume and mass, and then split into daughter formations. As a result, coacervates were able to grow. Further, the coacervate droplets underwent natural selection, which ensured their evolution. Now, the Oparin-Haldane theory is considered to be outdated because it cannot explain such a property of living organism as reproduction. In the scientific discussion, the Oparin-Haldane theory has been replaced by the RNA world hypothesis.
Coacevic drops, that's good. But why doesn't anyone explain where these proteins come from? Okay, suppose somehow a chain of amino acids was formed, but they must conjoin in the right order, so that the protein not only coagulates in space, but also could undergo a chemical reaction. I do understand where the proteins come from in the laboratory, but where they came from in the primordial chemical soup billions of years ago, when there was nothing living on Earth, I do not understand. There must be some explanation for this. It is known that the first fundamental step toward life is the appearance of a carrier of information and mechanism of duplicating this information, that is, the interaction of DNA and RNA and proteins. This is a very complex system. Where did it come from in the primordial soup?
Most likely, the first molecular systems were isolated from the environment in different ways. Groups of molecules could, for example, be held together on dust particles or some mineral surface. However, it is possible that already at that time the most primitive systems had a real membrane shell, just like modern cells. But what was inside these cells? It turned out that RNA molecules claimed the role of stuffing. Now the term RNA world is found in many publications on the origin of life and has become almost a winged word, as has the term primordial soup. The RNA world theory, or more correctly the RNA world hypothesis, suggests that it was this molecule that gave rise to life. After all, it was these molecules that could not only reproduce themselves, but also perform all the other reactions necessary for the existence of the cell. Neither DNA nor protein alone were capable of this. The more researchers delved deeper into the study of this molecule, the more often they discovered previously unknown functions of RNA. Most surprising was the discovery of RNA's ability to speed up chemical reactions in living systems, that is, act as a catalyst. In addition, RNAs can also be carriers of hereditary information. Naturally, the full picture remains to be reconstructed, as there are many unresolved questions. For example, why is the modern world not an RNA world? How did the transition occur? Scientists suggest that apparently ancient RNAs began to use protein molecules as tools. Such RNAs also became capable of synthesizing useful molecules from the environment for their own purposes, while gaining the advantage of reproduction. And then, according to scientists, the apparatus of transcription and translation arose with the help of evolution, and gradually the responsibility for catalysis passed to proteins and the storage of information to DNA. The tools turned out to be so convenient that they displaced their masters from many spheres of activity.
It is completely unclear where this primary membrane, which holds everything together, came from. Where are the laboratory experiments that show how it emerged? And the most important question is, where did the RNA itself in these primary cells come from? Where is the reaction of its origin from inorganic compounds? And how did it sustain its life if it supposedly reproduced itself? Who taught RNA to make its own tools? And then how did proteins and DNA take over? Do they have a mind of their own? So, the first stage is nothing but questions. There is not a single clear explanation of how this fundamental step of evolution took place. What shall I do? Does it give Alex a chance? Okay, let's see what science says at the next stage of evolution, from complex protein molecules to a primary living cell that knows how to maintain homeostasis, feed and reproduce. Okay. Suppose we already have the main molecule of a living cell, the carrier of hereditary information, DNA, and the mechanism for copying this information, let's say. But how did the cell become a single whole? What does science say? First, we need to understand how the cell is organized. So what is the protozoa unicellular organism?
The structure of a single-celled organism is infinitely complex. For example, E. coli. It is as small as 3 micrometers. For understanding, it's 3,000ths of a millimeter. For such an organism to live, that is, to be autonomous, develop and reproduce, it needs 4,400 genes. Or, in other words, about 4.6 million letters. which describe everything in this cell. Therefore, these letters must be ordered in a very precise, meaningful manner and located in a place protected from external influences inside a complex membrane. The cell must reproduce. Therefore, a mechanism to transcribe the letters from DNA to RNA, which describe the internal structure of the cell, is needed, and the mechanism of translation from RNA language to that of proteins. This complex system is capable of producing at least 4,400 different types of proteins, necessary for the entire life cycle of the cell: respiration, movement, nutrition, and reproduction. And all this equipment is just for the protozoan, single-celled creature, and we don't even mention how this creature analyzes its surroundings and makes decisions.
Impressive, especially when you remember that all organisms and the human body are born from a single cell. But it's already a mature organism. How could it all come together and start working together so that it could go on living? Where is the assembly mechanism hidden? I have to understand what scientists say about the emergence of the primordial living cell at random and the formation of its structure.
Fred Hoyle, a famous British astronomer and cosmologist, member of the Royal Society, in his book Evolution from Space, writes, "There are about 2,000 enzymes, and the chance of obtaining them all in a random trial is only 1 part in 10 to the power of minus 40,000, an outrageously small probability that could not be faced even if the whole universe consisted of organic soup." Indeed, if you try to calculate this value and define in numbers such a probability, you will get 0. The probability of synthesizing a single protein consisting of 300 amino acids is 1 chance per 2 by 10 to the power of minus 390 degrees. Again, this is negligible. If we reduce the number of amino acids in a protein to 20, then the number of possible combinations of the synthesis of such a protein will be 10 to the 18th power. It is only an order of magnitude greater than the number of seconds in 4.5 billion years. It is easy to see that evolution on Earth simply did not have time to try all the options and choose the best one. Considering the fact that the amino acids in proteins are chained specifically rather than randomly, the probability of synthesizing a protein molecule would be the same as if a monkey accidentally typed one of the Shakespeare's tragedies. A DNA molecule consists of 50 to 245 million connected pairs of nucleotides. If you apply probability theory to these giant molecules, even the word impossible would not be sufficient. Going 1 step higher in the development of living things, we can see that a single molecule by itself makes no difference. Even the smallest bacterium, Mycoplasma hominis, H39, contains 600 types of proteins. In this case, we will have to apply probability theory to 600 types of proteins.
I have never thought before what the probability of spontaneous cell birth is. It is staggering that the time of our planet's existence would not be long enough for it to emerge by chance. And that's not all. Assembling a cell is half the battle. It must still come to life, that is, feed, develop, and multiply. And this is only possible under certain environmental conditions. I read that the complexity of processes that take place in one cell is compared to the complexity of managing the entire universe. I wonder who then so wisely controls the life of a cell and even the whole universe.
If a simple cell of living organism were enlarged until it was 20 kilometers in diameter and looked like a giant balloon, capable of covering London or New York, then we would see an object of unparalleled complexity. We would see the semblance of an automated factory larger than a city and performing almost as many unique functions as all production facilities organized by humans on Earth. Moreover, this factory would possess one characteristic that none of our most modern machines have. is the ability to reproduce itself in its entirety in a matter of hours. It is believed that this structure arose through random processes. It can be found that almost all features of our advanced technological tools have their counterpart in the cell. Artificial language and decoding systems, databases for information storage and retrieval, control systems for automatic assembly of parts and components, corrective safety devices used for quality control, assembly processes based on the assembly principles and modular construction. All of the processes going on in the cell are chemical. But where is the information mechanism of control and regulation hidden?
Wow, nothing but questions. When will the answers begin? Who created the primordial cell? And why do cells in turn form such various and complex biological systems? How does the cell understand what it needs to transform itself into? After all, it is an information process, and the cell is in fact a chemical plant. But management and information is a completely different perspective. I wonder, what do modern researchers say about the relationship between information and biology? Maybe here I will find the answer to my question.
As Hubert Yockey notes, genetic information is a fractional, linear, and digital system. It is amazing that the technological aspect of information theory and coding theory has existed in the living world for at least 3.85 billion years. How could nature create this super complex system by itself 3.5 billion years ago, even before there was life on Earth? That is, before the selection mechanism started working. How could this code, which is the only key to life on Earth, have emerged on its own, worked from the beginning, and never evolved since then? All these questions remain unanswered. Doctor of Biological Sciences Peter Petrovich Garyayev conducted a detailed analysis of the genetic code model and made a conclusion that DNA, RNA, and proteins are actually texts, in the real sense of the term. An embryo, developing from a single cell, zygote, has some textual instructions to its cells, how to behave and what to do, but these are not complete instructions. Imagine that you are building a house and have textual descriptions of all the building materials, their quantity, weight, color, consistency, strength, etc. But there are no blueprints of the house, and you can't build a house without them. It is the same in the process of building a body of a human, an animal, a plant, etc. Numerous and different blueprints are needed. Where are they, and what are they like? These blueprints are chromosomes. Chromosomes are coiled into spiral DNA molecules. Chromosomes of each cell are a holographic nanobiocomputer, controlling strategic processes of organism development and its maintenance in normality and in the adult state. In other words, we see nonlinear repetition of the same phenomenon, function, structure in different scale dimensions. A simple and correct thought arises that the genetic apparatus, like all organisms, is a result of the Creator's work. Peter Garyayev, God's Code.
Holographic and informational structures are the programs of cell development. It is clear. Let's assume that they are. But if there is a program, then there must be a programmer. So how can I refute creationism with all this information? The second stage turns out to be a failure too. My only hope is Darwin and his theory of natural selection. Surely, in all the time of biological experiments, scientists must have produced at least one new species of living beings. This would fully confirm evolutionary theory. I will try to find such an experiment, but so far 2-0 in favor of Alex. That's amazing. Do we really have to negotiate?
Back in the 20s of the last century, more than 100 years ago, in the laboratory of genetics at the Institute of Experimental Biology, scientists conducted the first study in the world, the purpose of which was to confirm Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. In the process of this study, the saturation of natural populations of Drosophila with hereditary changes, mutations, was tested. As a result, not a single useful trait was obtained, and no new species was bred. Does this mean that the theory of natural selection is wrong? As biology professor Michael Pittman said, countless geneticists have subjected flies to all kinds of mutations many times. And did they get humans as a result? Unfortunately, no. Only some of the monsters created by geneticists were able to continue their existence outside the vessels in which they were kept. The flies that were mutated either died immediately, were mutilated, or became sterile. Michael Pittman, professor of biology, plant physiology at the University of Sydney.
Oh, oops, what's that? Not a single new species or transitional form for 100 years? How could that be? If evolution had been culling blindly without a plan, then we would be inundated with failed species and failed attempts rejected by evolution. These lovers who didn't fit into the market must be the majority among archaeological finds. Imagine an engineer who is blindly going through the variants of car design. He puts 3, 4, or 7 wheels, 2 engines, 3 seats on the roof, headlights behind, and releases these freaks on the market. He has to let them out into the world to get them through natural selection. We should just be swamped with these loser monsters, but they are not in the archaeological layers or in modern laboratories. Oops, and Alex told me that there are biological systems indeed that you can't take a single bolt out of, and I let it slip past my ears at the time. Indeed, how could they have emerged?
An engine capable of speeds up to 100,000 RPM that repairs itself and uses universal ATP energy as fuel. This engine has a design similar to that of an electric motor. Could such a device have emerged by itself in the process of evolution? This was the question Michael Behe, doctor of biology, asked himself in 1988. He introduced into biology the concept of an irreducible complexity, a system in which all parts are simultaneously necessary to ensure its operation, and the removal of even one element leads to a complete malfunction of the system. Michael Behe's conclusions in his book Darwin's Black Box, year 1996, are the following. The flagellal bacterial engine is an indivisible system of more than 40 parts, and missing even one would result in a completely non-functional system, which means that the system could not have occurred by means of natural selection.
These machines, some of them are running at 100,000 RPMs and are hardwired into a signal transduction or sensory mechanism so that it's getting feedback from the environment.
And even though they're spinning that fast, they can stop on a dime. It only takes a quarter turn for them to stop and shift directions and start spinning 100,000 RPM in the other direction.
And just like outboard motors on motorboats, it has a large number of parts which are necessary for the motor to work.
The bacterial flagellum, 2 gears, forward and reverse, water-cooled, proton motive force, it has a stator, it has a rotor, it has a U-joint, it has a drive shaft, it has a propeller, and they function as these parts of machines. It's not convenient that we give them.
Scott Minnick obtained similar results. He found the same 40 components in flagellate bacteria, 30 of which are unique and cannot be borrowed from anywhere else. That is, they had not previously been found in any living organism, and there was no possibility of their inheritance. The existence of any transitional species has not been found, but even if all the parts are found, the complexity of assembly remains an unsolved problem for supporters of evolutionary development. Since the discovery, scientists have tried to understand how the rotary engine could have emerged by natural selection. So far, no one has been able to give a clear explanation.
A motor with more than 40 separate parts formed on its own? Isn't it a joke? Indeed, how could such a thing emerge by itself? After all, from Darwin's point of view of evolution, such an engine had to be assembled gradually, because according to his theory, all structural changes in an organism accumulate over a long period of time by means of natural selection. So what to do? Okay, I'll leave that fact for now. But it's interesting, are there other similar systems in nature from which you can't throw away even one part?
Another striking representative of the irreducible system is the bombardier beetle. This small insect is a walking, living flamethrower. It has special reservoirs in its body where such substances as hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide are accumulated. In case of danger, this mixture is pushed into a narrow passageway where it is enriched with special enzymes. The result is a chemical reaction with the release of large amounts of heat. The combat mixture is heated to about 100 degrees, and then the boiling jet is ejected towards the aggressor. Supporters of creationism say that such a complex living chemical factory could only have appeared at once, assembled. Otherwise, the beetle would simply be torn apart.
That is, as in the case of the Flagellabacteria engine, such a complex mechanism was created all at once by some genius designer. It is interesting. If I wanted to create an engine like the Flagellabacterium or a flamethrower like the bombardier beetle from scratch, without any instructions or knowledge, how long would it take me? And perhaps these are not yet the most complex biological systems. I wonder how much iron, ore and other materials would have to be shaken in a special mixer to make a BMW M3. Alex would like it. I think he would make it faster himself, because if we wait for evolutionary transformations, not only our lives, but the lives of the whole universe will not be enough. And then, why will we need this BMW? And where will we go in it if there is no universe itself? Yes, in these cellular systems, everything is precisely tuned and adjusted to every fraction of a millimeter, as in the engine of a modern car. The slightest change in it will lead us to the car service instead of a pleasant trip to the countryside. And in general, if we continue this analogy, the BMW should turn into a Bugatti while driving on the roads. The longer you drive it, the cooler the car. That's absurd. But the fact is that there must be still a mechanism in living nature that transforms some species into others. Otherwise, we would only see the simplest organisms. Darwin said that this is the mechanism of evolution. When the fittest individuals survive, multiple changes accumulate in them over generations, resulting in a new species. That's the mechanism. That's where we should look for the key to the evolution of all living things. Now I need to find how to accumulate the changes in genetic information, and I'll have at least one closed item for my plan. That way I'll win back at least 1 point from Alex.
Back in the 70s of the 20th century, academicians Yuri Petrovich Altukhov, Yuri Grigorievich Rychkov, and Leonid Ivanovich Korochkin discovered the law of genetic monomorphism. This law says that there are monomorphic and polymorphic genes in the organism. Studies have shown that monomorphic genes, which make up about 2/3 of the entire genome, are completely different in different organisms, and any changes in them are fatal. Thus, any change in a monomorphic gene leads either to the fact that the organism will not be able to develop already at the embryonic stage, or to the fact that the newborn creature will not be able to survive under the influence of natural selection. Polymorphic genes allow for changes and control minor traits of the species, so-called adaptive traits, such as the length of the legs, color and density of the hair, height, weight, and so on, of different dog breeds. But a dog still remains a dog. The discovery of this law shows that the accumulation of genetic changes is only possible within a species. However, any changes in monomorphic genes, which concern vital functions and distinguish a given species from other species, are lethal. This puts a ban on the transition of one species to another. That is, the dog as a species can never become a cat or a horse. But intraspecies differences can be very significant. They are manifested in a large number of breeds. Having studied genetic processes in natural populations of animals and plants, as well as paleontological material, Yuri Petrovich Altukhov and his colleagues showed that any population aggregate has an amazing stability in time and space. And this stability is achieved within a few generations after the resettlement of the population in the range, leaving no possibility for long and gradual macroevolutionary changes.
What a pity! Now Darwin is screwed. Someone has installed fuses in the DNA molecules that prevent a frog from becoming a princess. What should I do? Maybe there are some modern analogues to Darwin's theory that take into account the latest science, and after all, can explain how the modern living cell with its complex structure emerged.
Scientists ask themselves the question, how did the very complex structures inside modern cells appear in the process of evolution? To solve this question, they put forward an endosymbiotic theory. The fact is that structures such as mitochondria in animals and chloroplasts in plants perform key functions in the cell. They are in many ways similar to the cells of bacteria. Therefore, scientists explain the appearance of mitochondria and chloroplasts by the successful symbiosis of some hypothetical free-living bacteria with animal and plant ancestor cells. These bacteria first began to live inside another cell and then in the process of evolution turned into these cellular structures, closely embedding themselves inside the metabolism of the host cell.
They certainly came up with an interesting idea. This theory is based on the interaction of already existing cells, but it doesn't explain the very fact of their appearance. Yes, and it sounds like scientists are trying to fit their hypothesis to the facts. Oh, I've done so much work and no result. Maybe there are still some modern theories that are more adequate.
The synthetic theory of evolution is a modern evolutionary doctrine that includes both Darwinism and the latest achievements of science, such as genetics and ecology. In this theory, evolution is based only on polymorphic genes, responsible for adaptation, and point mutations play a decisive role. But any disturbances in monomorphic genes are lethal. Therefore, the formation of new species can occur only through major, systemic rearrangements of the monomorphic part of the genome without disturbing the genes themselves, that is, through hybridization. This process is based on the combination in one cell of genetic material from different cells, observed in plants, fish, lizards, and polyploidy, a multiple increase in the number of chromosomes in plant or animal cells. The process of formation or production of hybrids is a process during which, under the influence of a number of stress factors, such as high or low temperature, ionizing radiation or chemicals, a multiple increase in the number of chromosomes in one cell occurs. But the cell does not divide into two. But since monomorphic genes are not changed, the species remains the same species. Therefore, the mechanisms of hybridization and polyploidy are not able to explain the diversity of the animal and plant world.
Also, in modern theories, there is nothing interesting. Now, the last hope for archaeology. If we find the sequence of transformation of one species from its simplest form to more complex ones, then the fact of evolution is obvious. It means that happened. I will try to find this material. What is this? It gets even more interesting.
Scientists cannot explain anything. They do not even want to take into consideration archaeological finds that do not correspond to both Darwin's theory and the officially accepted chronology of the development of flora and fauna. Dinosaurs are believed to have died out about 60 million years ago, and human ancestors rose to their feet about 7 million years ago. That is, dinosaurs and humans could not intersect. Then how to explain these artifacts? Petroglyphs. Sculptures. Paintings. And mosaics. Another stumbling block is the findings of dinosaur footprints around the world, next to which human footprints were found. The largest location of dinosaur footprints in the world is in Texas, in the Pallaxi River, the so-called Valley of the Giants. In 1930, Sternberg discovered here about 400 dinosaur footprints. The uniqueness of these traces is that human footprints were found very close by. The location of the tracks looked like a man was chasing a dinosaur. American geologist Dr. Cecil N. Dougherty said that in this place there are numerous prints of various types of dinosaur footprints, and human footprints are found everywhere next to them. These findings are detailed in the report of the geologist Dr. Billy Caldwell and biologist Jack Fleming. Jack Fleming shared that official science is in no hurry to recognize and explore the findings in more detail. They prefer to simply ignore them. Moreover, official science will not notice fossilized ruts from wheeled vehicles during paleontological research next to dinosaur footprints found in Brazil, near the city of Sousa. According to preliminary data, they are several million years old.
I'm shocked. Vehicle ruts that are millions of years old. This completely destroys the modern geochronicle scale. I see the refutation of the theory of evolution by the facts of archaeological finds. And what I have in the end? The first stage, random synthesis of organic molecules from chemical elements, the primordial soup and chemical evolution. No evidence was found. The second stage, synthesis of the central informational structure of living matter and the emergence of protocell. No evidence was found. The third stage, evolution from protocell to human, the theory of endosymbiosis and actually Darwin. No evidence was found. It turns out that I have found no evidence of the evolutionary development of life on Earth at any of the stages. What can I do? If I complete the task and pull the evidence to get credit, then how would I look into Alex's eyes? After all, he has told me many times that there is no evidence for evolution, that everything in the world was created by God, but I didn't believe. What do I have to do? Here is what. I will write everything I have learned today. After all, it's true. It turns out that there is no coincidence, but there is life in all its incredible complexity, fullness and beauty. Life is a strictly planned and purposeful activity. Now I'm convinced of it. Alex was right. It means everything was created by the Creator, and I was created by Him.
As of today, all information about the origin of life on Earth is publicly available. Everyone has the option to accept a lie or find the truth. Not so long ago, more than 600 scientists from around the world signed an appeal to the scientific community in which they proposed to reconsider the theory of evolution presented by Charles Darwin. Specialists in the field of biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics from the USA and several European countries openly expressed their skepticism about the understanding of the laws of evolution that still dominate our world. We can't live without the truth. Truth is life.
It is interesting that for the random origin of life on Earth, there is simply not enough time, not only for the creation of something intelligent, but even simply for the creation of a single-celled organism. There is a time it takes to assemble by blind selection, and single-celled organism is much longer the time of existence of not only our planet, but the universe as well. This suggests that the creation of life is a completely controlled process, and whoever controls it knows exactly how it should be done, down to the smallest detail. In order to hide these facts, the adherents of the theory of evolution resort to various tricks. One of them is fictional drawings. Evolutionists use them to prove their doctrine is right. They purposely give the appearance of a human being by drawing out forms which are not preserved in the fossils. For example, the structure of the nose and limbs, the hair and the shape of the eyebrows. Moreover, the creatures they imagined are depicted in the circle of the family, at hunting, and in the other episodes of everyday life. These are just fantasies. Then there is no facts and evidence. There is not a single ancient human fossil that supports these reconstructions by evolutionists.
Quite correct. When reconstructing the appearance of an ancient man, evolutionists go so far as to create 3 completely different drawings based on one skull. The robust Australopithecus skull, Australopithecus robustus, or Zinjanthropus, was used to reproduce 3 types of appearance. This is an obvious confirmation of the fabrication of the evidence of the proponents of the theory of evolution. The subjective commenting on the remains and the compilation of mythical reconstructions are clear evidence of the degree to which the evolutionist falsifications have reached. A similar example can be seen in this image, where the same bones were used, but in one picture, the creature looks more like an ape, and in the other looks more like a person. These are just a few examples of the many crude fakes made by evolutionists to prove their teachings. But thank God, science did not stand still, and new discoveries and theories appeared that disproved Darwin's theory.
The problem of the Cambrian explosion has a direct relation to the distort of Darwin's theory of evolution. To be exact, it simply contradicts it. The first person who realized this was Darwin himself. He immediately saw that the Cambrian explosion is a stumbling block to his theory. In his book, The Origin of Species, Darwin wrote, I'm citing, "The case," meaning Cambrian explosion, "at present must remain inexplicable and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained." In the same book, Charles Darwin wrote, "If numerous species belonging to the same genera or families have really started into life at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of evolution through natural selection." So what happened then 530 to 540 million years ago? Then, at the beginning of the Cambrian epoch, a unique event occurred on Earth. Suddenly, quickly, and almost simultaneously, many new biological forms emerged. That is, the main mystery of the Cambrian explosion was that there were no direct transitional forms between the bacteria, protozoan, algae, and small multicellular organisms that inhabited Earth's oceans before the Cambrian explosion, and the new types of organisms that were emerged. Here's what it looked like based on current scientific understanding. The Earth, according to modern estimates, was formed about 4 to 1/2 billion years ago. The first single-celled organism in its oceans appeared 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. There is life on Earth appeared almost immediately after the conditions necessary for it were created. But then there were no species for 3 billion years, all this time, there was only a change, an improvement of already existing microscopic bacteria and protozoan algae. And then, in an extremely short period of time, in paleontological terms, in 3 to 5 million years, the richest and most diverse fauna, literally new life, emerges. And some paleontologists have estimated that this time period was even shorter. In this period, both multicellular organisms like sponges, coelenterates, different types of worms, and representatives of highly organism animal types like mollusks, arthropods, chemichordates, and chordates appeared. The Cambrian explosion gave such a sudden and unexpected effect that is often called the evolutionary Big Bang, which you must agree is not very similar to a long and consistent evolutionary process. Many groups of animals that appeared at this time acquired hard skeletons and totally different on the different bases. For example, there is literally nothing in common between the skeletal elements of sponges, spicules, shells of mollusks, and chitinous shells of arthropods. How do they arise simultaneously in the same period of time? The living organism found in this paleontological layer had such developed and complex physiological systems as visual organs, gills, and circulatory systems, which have not changed at all over time and do not differ in any way from modern ones. And some even exceed the complexity of their structure. For example, two lensed eyes of a trilobite resemble honeycomb. And David Rowell, professor of geology at Harvard University, regarding the eyes of trilobites, say that the trilobites 450 million years ago used an optimal design which would require a well-trained and imaginative optical engineer to develop today. The structure of trilobite eyes distinguishes it from the absolute majority of modern living organisms. And I had mineral lenses made of calcite instead of the crystalline lens. In a modern organism, there are mineral optic lenses, but the complexity of the visual organs does not compare with the eyes of the trilobites. The famous paleontologists Bridget Schoenemann and Ivan Clarkson with the colleagues studied the eyes of one order of trilobites and found that their eyes saw extremely clearly and with high resolution. Tomography and synchrotron research showed that their eyes were organized in a hierarchical way. Small visual subunits were assembled under one large lens. The authors called the visual system like a hypereye. Among modern arthropods, there were no analogs of such system. Studying the topic of Cambrian explosion, involuntarily, there are many uncomfortable questions arise. Especially knowing that about 90% of modern animal types, or namely 32 out of 35, appeared for the first time during this period. They appeared at once, without direct transitional forms. And what is the most interesting is that in the previous period, there not even anything remotely resembling these types. Now, let's hear from the Hugh Ross, PhD, a Canadian astrophysicist, who will tell us more about this unique segment of Earth's history.
When I was 11 years of age, I read a book on evolutionary biology and said the numbers don't work. You have all these, phyla and classes and orders that show up before humanity and nothing like that after humanity. And I remember reading the Bible and said, this gives me an explanation for the fossil record problem. For 6 days, God creates. On the seventh day, he stops creating. And so for 6 time periods, God was creating new phyla, new classes, new orders. And on the seventh day, he has stopped doing that. And it's something you see with the Cambrian explosion and the Avalon explosion. The phyla show up first. So the naturalistic model says that you're going to get a proliferation of species, which produces new genera, which produces new families, new orders, classes, and finally phyla. But the fossil record has it exactly the opposite. The phyla come first, and they come simultaneously. In the Cambrian explosion, all the phyla show up all at once at the very beginning of the event. And so it's the opposite of what you'd expect from a naturalistic perspective. And the suddenness with which these higher taxa appear tells me this is not naturalism. There must be a supernatural creator that's responsible for introducing these major forms of life. Again, one of the more compelling arguments is that when we look at the past history of the Earth, we see it has these oxygenation events where the oxygen level in the atmosphere jumps up from less than a 10,000th of a percent to 1 or 2%. That's the first great oxygenation event. And then you got the second oxygenation event where it jumps from less than 1% up to 8%. It's a very sudden jump caused by the great unconformity. And immediately you got Avalon animals. There's no delay. As soon as the oxygen hits 8%, you have this proliferation of Avalon phyla. And likewise, later, you get the oxygen jumping from 8% to 10%. 10% is the minimum that you need to get animals with internal organs, a brain circulation system, a skeleton, and external organs. And as soon as it hits 10%, you immediately have these Cambrian phyla, including our own phyla. We're part of the chordate phyla. The chordates show up at the very beginning of the Cambrian explosion. Even vertebrates show up at the very beginning of the Cambrian explosion. And it happens simultaneous with a jump in oxygen to the minimum level that makes these creatures possible. So that again tells me there's a God behind this that basically says he's the one orchestrating these great oxygen bursts, and simultaneously with them, he creates these forms of life. And as I share with my evolutionary biology friends, we need to understand the history of Earth's life in the context of the brightening sun. The sun is getting brighter and brighter and brighter as it fuses more and more hydrogen into helium, which means you need a God who removes life from planet Earth, replaces it with new life, where that new life is more efficient on pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And only a mind that knows the future physics of the sun would know which life to remove from the Earth and which new life to replace that old life with. And you actually see this in Psalm 104, verses 29 and 30, where it says it's the property of all life to die off, but God recreates and renews the face of the earth, and he recreates at exactly the right pace to compensate for the brightening of the sun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. Dear viewers, do you know that the Cambrian explosion was known about 20 years before Charles Darwin published his Origin of Species? The first person who discovered the Cambrian explosion was Roderick Impe Murchison, an English aristocrat who decided to do science under the influence of his wife. By studying the fossils of ancient eras, layer by layer, he discovered this stark contrast between the richness and diversity of animal remains in the Cambrian sediment layers and the extremely poor fossil remains in the previous layers. Being a man of faith and sharing the belief of the creator of the classification of living organisms, Carol Linnaeus, that said there are as many species as the infinite being produced, diverse in forms in the beginning. Murchison regarded the phenomenon he discovered as a direct evidence of God's intervention in the development of life. But according to Darwin, evolution had happened gradually, smoothly, and continuously. And Darwin tried to find a way out of this situation. Perhaps he suggested that Cambrian explosion was not actually a real explosion. Perhaps, in fact, it had been preceded by a long period of gradual accumulation of evolutionary changes and formation of new biological forms. But as we already know, Murchison simply could not detect these preceding intermediate forms. At present, they're trying to reconstruct the long-hidden Precambrian evolution with the help of genetic studies of different modern animal species. However, when they start to check the molecular biological data with the paleontological data, the hypothesis of long-hidden Precambrian evolution is not confirmed. And it turns out that at the moment, there are not enough reasons to consider these hypotheses wrong and the Cambrian explosion itself to be the real facts that follow directly from the paleontological data. During the existence of life on our planet, such evolutionary explosions have occurred repeatedly. Old species have partially become extinct, but new species with completely different characteristics have appeared in a short period of time to replace them. You can see on the scale periods of major mass extinctions are marked with the asterisks. Why this is happening and what is really behind it will be discussed later in our Kaleidoscope of Facts. By the way, it is also difficult for evolutionists to clearly answer the question of why in modern nature, as well as the nature of the Cambrian period, there are lower multicellular organisms, sponges, worms, sea stars, and slightly more complicated mollusks, floating crustaceans, and so on. Why haven't they evolved into higher forms over such long period of time? If evolution is a positive, inevitable progression upward of all living things, why has not touched all the beings? If we follow the logic of Darwin's evolution, there should have only one crowned evolution left on the planet at this time, human. And that's it. But there are still amoebae, insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and apes living on Earth at the same time, and humans. Evolutionary paleontologist Mark Charnetsky wrote a major problem in providing the theory of evolution has been the fossil record. This record has never revealed traces of Darwin's hypothetical intermediate variants. Instead, species appeared and disappeared abruptly, and this anomaly has fooled the creationist argument that each species was created by God. Biologists are now finding animal species, though to be long extinct, which evolutionists imagine to be transitional forms. For example, evolutionists argue that marine invertebrates from the Cambrian period evolved into fish in tens of millions of years. But invertebrates have now skeleton, and the supporting part of the body is outside, while the skeleton of fish is inside. And the evolution from invertebrates to fish requires a lot of changes. We had to make the mark in the form of transitional forms and in large numbers. Scientists have spent 160 years turning the Earth's crust upside down and trying to find these not existent forms. But there were no transitional forms found among the millions of invertebrate fossils and millions of fish fossils. Here, even the imagination of artists could not portray this being. And in fact, all three classes of bony fish appeared in the geological strata at the same time. Then, in the scenario of evolutionists, fish evolved into amphibians. But even this scenario has no proof, and no remains of a half fish, half amphibian have been found. There are only lies and fantasies. For example, look at the picture on the left. The Paramastiga, an animal that lived at the end of the Devonian period, about 372 million years ago. And on the right is how this creature was represented by artists. During the 2009-2012 fieldworks on the banks of the river Ishma in the Congo Republic, scientists have found almost 200 bones in such good preservation that we were able to reconstruct the skull and shoulder belt of the Paramastiga. The key point is to note that there are no fins on the left side of the reconstruction. This creature had the same limbs as the modern amphibians, such as the salamander. And here is another example. December 22, 1938, in the Indian Ocean was discovered salangan fish, though it had not thought it would be extinct like 70 million years ago. It was this fish that evolutionists represented as a transitional form between fish and amphibians. In the following years, more than 200 individuals of coelacanth were found in other places. Despite all the claims, they have neither a developed brain nor primitive lungs. And what the researchers mistook for primitive lungs turned out to be a sebaceous gland. Moreover, as it turned out, this candidate ready to go on land lives in the deep ocean waters and does not rise above 180 meters in depth. The same can be said about the transition of reptiles to the mammalian order. The founder of the theory, the new neo-Darwinism, paleontologist George Gaylord Simpson, claims the most puzzling event in the history of life on Earth is the change from the Mesozoic, the age of reptile, to the age of mammals. It is as the curtain were rung down suddenly on the stage, where all the leading roles were taken by reptiles, and rose again immediately to reveal the same setting, but an entirely new cast. And the leading parts are played by mammals. So it's barely hinted in the preceding acts. In addition, all these mammals, such as bat, horse, rat, and whale, do not look alike, but appeared in the same geological period. Even with the most highly developed imagination, it is impossible to establish an evolutionary connection between them. Evolutionary zoologists write that anyone who tries to establish phylogenetic, that is, kinship relationship within the class of mammals, will only be disappointed. Another mythical transition from this form is Archaeopteryx. According to the evolutionists, Archaeopteryx is the ancestor of today's birds that existed 150 million years ago. According to the hypothesis, some of the small dinosaurs, Velociraptor and Dromaeosaur, winged and flew as the result of evolution. Archaeopteryx was the first to separate from its ancestors and begin to fly. This fictional account is published in many publications about evolution. The argument is based on the fact that ancient birds bring the lack of a sternum and the muscles necessary for flight attached to it. Modern birds, whether they can fly or not, and even those belonging to different families, such as bats, have the sternum. But recent studies of the remains of Archaeopteryx have shown that it's not a transitional form, but only an extinct bird that merely had features that modern birds do not have. Found in 1992, the next remains of Archaeopteryx astonished evolutionists because this specimen was found to have a sternum, the existence of which has previously been denied. On the other hand, one of the main proofs of the Archaeopteryx could fly was the structure of its feathers. The asymmetrical feather structure of Archaeopteryx, not different from that of modern birds, suggests its superior flying abilities. The presence of feathers on Archaeopteryx also indicates that this creature was warm-blooded, since one of the functions of feathers is to keep the body temperature. And if we consider that dinosaurs and modern reptiles are cold-blooded creatures, then the question arises as to how the transition from cold-blooded to warm-blooded animals could have occurred. Because these are enormous changes in energy and heat exchange, metabolic efficiency of the body, range of enzymes, and so on. Another stumbling block of the theory of evolutions, flowers. Charles Darwin himself called it an abominable mystery, because this apparent sudden leap might challenge his theory of evolution. because it is well known that the first dinosaurs in the Triassic and Jurassic periods lived in the world where there were no flowers. There is no reliable traces of flowering plants have been found. And then, at the beginning of the Cretaceous period, about 135 million years ago, the first angiosperm suddenly bloomed. And the 1960s, a study of fossil pollen from the coal plants from the England and North America showed that flowering plants appeared in the early Cretaceous. In general, the Cretaceous period, the time period between 135 and 65 million years ago, occupies a special place in the history of the Earth. At the same time, major deposits of oil, gas, more than half of the world's reserves, coal, chalk, and shale deposits emerged. It was in the Cretaceous period that the division of a single supercontinent, Pangaea, began. That's movement. The continents began to take modern shapes. The Pacific volcanic belt and the system of modern ocean ridges and the plateaus continues to develop, and the composition of the atmosphere changed. Birds and mammals appeared. And the very end of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago, the famous great extinction of the dinosaurs occurred. This event led not only to the extinction of the dinosaurs, but also to the extinction of many other groups of animals and plant organisms. In general, scientists have observed more than 25 mass extinctions and renewals of life in the history of life on Earth. American paleontologist John Sepkoski has compiled data on the marine animals for all the time from the Cambrian to modern times and plotted a graph with time on the horizontal line and diversity measured by the numbers of genera and families of living creatures on the vertical line. Sepkoski's graph shows very clearly that the whole evolution seems to be divided into two parts. Before the Permian crisis, when diversity was essentially stable, and after the crisis, when it has been steadily increasing. There is still no universally accepted explanation to it, but the fact itself is beyond doubt. It turns out that the Permian crisis dramatically changed the development on life on Earth. The Great Dying, or Permian-Triassic extinction, is thought to be the biggest catastrophe known to date, when more than 95% of all living creatures on the planet were gone. Scientists in Siberia have found chemical traces of that disaster, which led to the widespread deforestation and the collapse of the Earth's biosphere. These findings are presented in an article by Michael Broadley and co-authors in the journal Nature Geoscience. The Permian extinction started about 251 million and 939,000 years ago, coinciding with the peak of eruptions on the Putarana Plateau. Explosions of supervolcanoes are calculated to have released about 8.7 trillion tons of chlorine, 23 billion tons of bromine, and 96 million tons of iron into the Earth's upper atmosphere. These caused acid rains, acidification, and the destruction of the ozone layer, which deprived the planet of the protection from the cosmic rays for many hundreds of years. Scientists believe that such a scenario of the end Permian catastrophe suggests that these cataclysms was not an isolated, unique event. They emphasize that this scenario may well repeat itself in the future, if as a result of internal processes, the former rocks of oceanic crust containing halogens and other volatile substances approach the Earth's surface once more time. What caused these mass extinctions? In 2007, Michael Medvedev and Andrew Mellott at the University of Kansas hypothesized that cosmic rays from an unknown source caused mass extinction on Earth every 62 million years, In 2015, Lisa Randall and Matthew Rees at Harvard University explained the 35 million years extinction by dark matter streams. In any case, when studying the periods of mass extinctions, we can see a definite pattern. Scientists are currently attributing all 5 major mass extinctions to global climate change on the planet. Changes in seismic and volcanic activity, changes in the planet's magnetic field, acidification of seas and oceans, and so on, have all become detrimental to many species. We're now also witnessing serious climate change. Enough evidence have now been accumulated of various changes at the Earth's lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere that occurred over a relatively short period of time. You can find out more about these in the forum, Global Crisis, There Is a Way Out, which is to be held shortly on April 22nd, 2023. Independent volunteer researchers from 180 countries will talk about what's really happening to the core of the planets and what the real causes of the climate crisis are, what happened to Mars, and why the Earth may perish for the same reason in the next 14 years. Yes, you heard it right. We are not talking about another mass extinction, but the possible death of the planet. Why can it happen although our planet is self-organizing and self-repairing mechanism with a unique structure which has been in operation for a long period of time? See more on the April 22nd, 2023 at the forum, Global Crisis, There Is a Way Out. I suggest watching the forum trailer.
We tell the truth that is hidden from people. We are independent volunteer researchers from 180 countries. We conduct interdisciplinary research that no other institution or organization in the world can handle. The global crisis is a terrifying reality that has engulfed our world and will soon completely destroy it. Unfortunately, most people today are unaware of the impending threat. On November 12, 2022, at the International Online Forum, Global Crisis, Our Survival is in Unity, there was presented a shocking climate forecast based on our mathematical model. Now, we know the exact date of our planet's destruction and the natural disasters that will cause it. This climate report is the result of 26 years of hard work by a huge number of volunteers, scientists, experts, and independent researchers. The climate Cerberus is gaining strength with each passing day. It is obvious that if we don't take any action, all of humanity will perish. On April 22nd, 2023, at the next International Online Forum, Global Crisis, There Is a Way Out, you will learn what events will occur on our planet before the year 2036, and why the destruction of the planet is not the worst thing that humankind will have to face. There are only a few years left to change the course of events. We still have a chance, but in order to use it, all people must learn about it. Today, the future depends on everyone's choice, and the choice is simple: to preserve life on Earth or not. To prevent fatal events and find out what you can do to save humanity, join the International Online Forum Global Crisis, There Is a Way Out, on April 22nd, 2023 at 1500 GMT. Join in. Spread the word about this forum on all platforms, in all social media. Everyone should know about this forum. The official website of the Creative Society International Project, creativesociety.com.
And now we continue our Kaleidoscope of Facts. And we'll talk about one very interesting topic: what fills all matter with life. In fact, all planets in all star systems, all stars in the entire universe work in a similar way. This is how the overall mechanism works. We are cyclically subjected to an external influence of a powerful kind of energy. This leads to a certain reactions, including nuclear reactions within our planet. Our planet has already gone through more than 100 such cycles. What is the reason for the existence of such cyclicity? The answer lies in the structure of matter itself. All matter, both living and non-living, is just different combinations of a certain number of elements. Matter is always moving towards extinction. It is programmed for destruction. Why is so? Because our planet, the galaxy, the universe, the whole material world is constantly in motion. And it is this motion that gives us time. If there is time, everything will be finite. If there is motion, it will stop sometime. That is the energy that sets this impulse of motion, runs out, and everything ceases to exist. And all compactions of energy simply disintegrate. And so, in order for life to exist, a certain stimulus is constantly needed, which energizes life and allows it to continue to exist. A renewal or impulse of life takes place. This impulse of life mixes everything. It sets the program for the next cycle. But on the other hand, it can also be destructive. There is everything that is unworthy, simply disappears and ceases to exist. But we, as humankind, can become a real united civilization, going through the process of evolution. And now I don't mean this doctrine which is imposed on us, but I mean evolution, and the process of continuous development of humankind, which from the lowest way of life up to the infinity, and everything is given for us for this. The choice is up to us. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, Alex, I totally agree with you. Our choice defines everything, and it depends on the choice that each of us makes today, whether we will become a civilization and rise to a new stage of development or slide into chaos. And when the unification of all mankind takes place, this will be the real evolution. But the big question is, if this is real evolution, what was the purpose of creating the Fates theory of evolution? Why was it necessary to spend so much time and effort to create and promote it? Who and why led science down a Fates path?
We talk a lot today about the failure of the theory of evolution. But have you ever wondered why this theory is being pushed so hard for the masses? The question, do you know this picture from a high school biology textbook? And this one? Do you know that this is a blatant lie? Scientists know that there are no rudiments and atavisms, and the embryo does not go through intrauterine stages of development as in evolution. Despite some external similarity, it turns out that one of the earliest stages of embryo development is in blastula. Blastula is a multicellular embryo that has a single layer structure, one layer of cells, stage in development of the embryo that the eggs of most animals go through. So it is completely different for different animals, since different animals have different types of cells, fragmentation, and so on. But to this day, school textbooks bluntly lie to children that human descended from apes, that life on Earth appeared by chance, and that we humans differ from dogs and cats only by our intellect. Why do they do this? In effort for better understand the roots of this issue, we studied historical facts and comparing them came to an interesting conclusion. But first things first.
Hello friends. To begin with, Darwin's idea of the evolution of species was not new. The idea had been in the air for a long time. Many naturalists, philosophers, and economists were talking about natural selection. For example, in 1813, English physician and naturalist Charles William Wells, in his report to the Royal Society of London, suggested that differences in disease resistance between Cuscodioids and Negroids, as well as differences in skin color, resulted from the extinction of intermediate unstable forms. Wells compared this process to the process of artificial selection. His report was published in 1818. Edward Blyth was an English zoologist who classified many birds of India. In 1835 and 1836, he published 2 articles in the English Journal of Natural History, in which he argued that under the conditions of fierce competition and lack of resources, only the strongest have a chance to reproduce. In 1809, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, a French naturalist, in his well-known book Philosophy of Zoology, set forth the following ideas. As organisms prove, they are forced to adapt to environmental conditions. According to Lamarck, useful traits acquired by an animal are passed on to its offspring. The famous philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, in his major philosophical work, The World as Will and Representation, argues that the driving force underlying the origin of biological in the will for self-preservation and survival, which forces them to adapt to their environment. The will to life of all living beings is expressed in the struggle for a scarce resource, and so each creature specializes in obtaining it in a certain specific way. For whatever anything living breathed, there immediately came another to devour it, and every animal is in a way designed and calculated throughout, down to the minutest detail, for the purpose of destroying some other animal. The struggle factor in Darwin's view is of the utmost importance. And if we take a closer look, we can see the same thing in the above-mentioned work of Schopenhauer. Even Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, wrote in his scientific work Zoonomia in 1794, where he stated that the strongest and the most active individual reproduces better, transmitting its qualities to the next generation. However, he also spoke of the prime mover who sets all the things in motion. Charles Darwin considered his grandfather's ideas to be wrong.
Few people know that the author of The Origin of Species was a successful graduate of the Faculty of Theology at Christ's College in 1831 at Cambridge University. He was interested in biology, and after graduating from college, he was invited to join the voyage as a naturalist on the HMS Beagle for an expedition to the shores of South America. From 1837, Darwin began to keep a diary in which he recorded data on breeds of domestic animals and plant varieties, as well as his considerations about natural selection. In the summer of 1842, Charles Darwin decided that he had collected enough material on the origin of species to write up his ideas in the form of a little sketch. It was already presenting the general structure of his theory. 2 years later, Darwin wrote an expanded version, essay, which he ordered to publish in case of his death unless he had time to write something new on the subject. Instead of publishing the essay immediately, Darwin spent the next 8 years, from 1836 to 1854, researching barnacles and engaging in other activities. It was not until September 1854 that he turned his attention back to the theory of the origin of species. I wonder why. There is a hypothesis that he was afraid of criticism and condemnation in his circles by the clerks, as he himself had little faith in his theory.
Or
maybe he was advised to put his work on hold. In 1844, the Chambers brothers published a 400-page book, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. Vestiges became a bestseller not only in England, but throughout Europe, surviving 11 reprints. Although there was much controversy about the authorship of the resonant book, it became very famous in many countries, despite the fact that it had many critics. It was written by Robert Chambers, little known outside Edinburgh, who, with his brother William, had a printing house and a bookshop there. The book talked about the length of the evolutionary process, that more complex forms emerged from simpler organized ancestors. Our brain goes through the various stages of fish, reptiles, and mammifers' brain, and finally becomes human. There is more than this, for after completing the animal transformations, it passes through the characters in which it appears in the Negro, Malay, American, and Mongolian nations, and finally is a Caucasian. And also that members of the inferior races are born as if before their time, not having passed all the stages of embryonic development. The Negro exhibits permanently the imperfect brain, projecting lower jaw and slender bent limbs of a Caucasian child. Some considerable time before the period of his birth, the Aboriginal American represents the same child nearer birth. The Mongolian is a rested infant newly born. It is clear today that Chambers' book was written to order and was meant to take the first hit to prepare an audience for Darwin's theory of evolution. Seeing the criticism of this essay, Darwin could have done a better job of writing his own work.
And the present Chambers still publishes encyclopedias, dictionaries and reference books, as well as collection of aphorisms and crossword puzzles and Sudoku. In fact, anything the customers asked for. But in those days, the order for the publisher was different. Anthropologists of the 19th century argued, did all human races come from the same ancestor or from different ones? Could this explain these cultural achievements and peculiarities? In the end, all discussions boiled down to whether Europeans could be called the superior race, and other races can be liked to animals, and thereby give Europeanoids the right to oppress and rule them. Remember, this was the age of colonial politics. The elite of British society and the common people, at least the educated part of it, needed a real, that is, a scientific picture of the world, easy to understand, yet one that did not contradict the moral fabric of society and justify the actions of the state. Chambers' book prepared the general public for the perception of Darwin's ideas, for the information in Darwin's book was indeed intended for the prepared reader.
By the way, Robert Chambers did not attend university, only graduated from school, and even that with difficulty, because from the age of 16 He had to earn his own bread. Nor did he discover or invent anything new. Some researchers still wonder how he managed to write his work.
It is not known how much longer Darwin would keep his book in his desk, but in 1858, when Darwin was about to finish a large part of his manuscript, he received a letter from the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who was working in the Maluku Islands at the time. The letter contained a manuscript that Wallace wanted to publish. Darwin was shocked by the contents. In the letter that Darwin sent to the Lyell at the same day, we can read, "I never saw a more striking coincidence. If Wallace had my MS sketch written out in 1842, he could not have made a better short abstract." End of quote. Living in Sarawak in Kalimantan, Wallace wrote in his first article on the law which has regulated the introduction of new species as early as February 1855. At that time, he left the question of the factors of evolution open, but he never ceased to ponder the problem. Exactly 3 years later, during the attack of malaria, he was working hard on the thesis of a recent book he had read by Malthus on overpopulation. Suddenly, in his own words, Wallace suddenly flashes upon me the idea of the survival of the fittest. End of quote. Parrish, he not only thought through the essentials of the new theory, but sketched it all out on the paper. And in the next 2 evenings, he wrote the article verbatim and sent it back to the Lyell in England. Of the impression made on Darwin and his friends by the receipt of the Wallace article, and on the influence these articles had on the publication of Darwin's long-standing writings, there is no need to speak. They are well known to everyone. Darwin gave his friend in the London kind of permission to persuade Wallace not to print his article on the origin of species, but to give priority to Darwin, who had begun the work earlier. Thus, Darwin published his work in 1859, and no one remembers Wallace except experts. Perhaps Darwin was guided not only by his thirst for fame. After all, Wallace had a negative attitude to Darwin's principles of sexual selection and did not recognize the inheritance of acquired characteristics. In his book, Human Progress, Past and Future, he strongly protested against the transfer of the principles of Darwinism to human relations. And this was contrary to the terms of the order.
Surprisingly, both scientists were inspired by the works of Thomas Malthus, an English priest and scientist, economist and demographer, author of the theory that uncontrolled population growth can result in decline in prosperity. In 1798, Malthus anonymously published his famous book, An Essay on the Principle of Population. The essay was part of an ongoing intellectual debate in the late 18th century about the origins of poverty. Malthus believed that in the absence of war and disease, humanity was reproducing too rapidly. Because of humans' need to reproduce, the population is constantly increasing. However, population growth, in his view, could only be stopped by countermeasures that included moral restraint or misfortune, such as wars, epidemics, and famines. Malthusianism developed into weak economic ideas. An example of this is the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834. Its opponents described the act as a Malthusian bill designed to force the poor to immigrate, to work for lower wages, to live on a coarser sort of food. This law initiated the sending of the poor, including women, the elderly and children, to forced labor in workhouses. For the poor, there was established an industrial order in which 8, 9-year-old children were forced to work 6 hours a day in the coal mines, and thousands died, unable to endure the terrible living and working conditions. The monstrous policy of racism had to be justified by the laws of nature, and Darwin received the order. Darwin was impressed by the idea that population growth would eventually lead to more individuals than the environment could feed. People would be forced to compete for their livelihood. And this led him to the assumption that organisms with a relative advantage in the struggle for survival and reproduction would be able to pass on their characteristics responsible for these advantages to further generations. The discovery of natural selection had nothing to do with the social and political doctrines of human society, nor with weapons of mass destruction. However, this biological discovery had an enormous impact on history and worldviews in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, giving rise to a new approach to the vision of human life and human society. Darwinism awakened a new direction in the vision of reality of human existence, which took the form of a tougher, sometimes brutal view of the value of human life. This set the stage for the greatest explosion of evil known in history. Not only did it manifest itself in the mass and systematic extermination of innocent people, but it also led to the rejection of moral and spiritual values and culture. Darwin's theory reduced human activity to the laws of mechanics and physiology. Haeckel defended the approach of scientific racism to Papuans, according to which they were no longer apes but not yet people. The polygenists, supporters of the hypothesis of different ancestors of races, were looking for evidence in anthropomorphic indicators, in differences in the structure of the skull and brain. Scientists were so carried away by the search for a transitional form that they falsified the idea more than once. Falsified the data more than once. Some evolutionists of the same time argued that not only ape-man remains would be found, but also individuals in different parts of the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, the search for a living transitional form reached absurdity. An example of such absurdity is the story of a pygmy called Ota Benga, which was captured by the evolutionary researcher Samuel Werner in 1904 in the Congo. The name Ota Benga meant friend in his language. He was married and had 2 children. He was chained up, put in a cage like an animal, and sent to America for the St. Louis World's Fair. He was placed in a cage with various species of apes and exhibited as the transitional form closest to man. 2 years later, he was moved to the Bronx Zoo in New York, where he had exhibited with the chimpanzee, gorilla Dina, and orangutan Dohung as the ancient ancestor of man. Zookeeper Dr. William T. Haniday often spoke about the honor of having such a rare transitional form, and zoo visitors treated Ota Benga like an animal. In the end, unable to bear the humiliation and shame, Ota Benga committed suicide. The doctrine of scientific racism, which justified European colonialism, is recognized as pseudoscientific, while Darwin's theory, which proved the basis of it, is still defended to the day Isn't it that type of a paradox? In the second half of the 19th century, racism was developed as a fact by a large majority of Western scientists. It is no exaggeration to say that many of the Friedrich Nietzsche ideas were born only as a result of the famous German philosopher being inspired by the evolutionary teachings of Charles Darwin. Nietzsche quite rightly saw in Darwin's theory a convincing alternative to religion, and this allowed the German to make the sensational statement, God is dead. It turns out that there is no God, then even everything is possible. Darwin's theory, evolutionary theory, actually abolished morality as well. All this was in line with Friedrich Nietzsche's mental constructions in his famous book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Karl Marx, born in 1818, was baptized into the Lutheran Church in 1824 and went to a Lutheran school where teachers praised his thoughtful writings on moral and religious topics, and his knowledge of theology was assessed as outstanding. His first written work was devoted to the love of Christ. But all this has lasted until he discovered Darwin's ideas and writings at the University of Berlin. Darwin teaches that survival of the fittest is characteristic of all forms of life. On the basis of this, Marx concluded that in humans, the struggle for existence tends to take the form of a class struggle. Marx emphasized that, from a Darwinian point of view, life is largely meaningless, except for pleasure, because our existence is merely an accident, a whim of nature, which in all probability will never happen again on Earth. There is also a connection between Darwinism and Nazism. Historians carefully collect information about the atrocities of the Hitler regime, but it never occurs to anyone to put it in the first place the fact that it is based on the philosophy of Darwin that this idea originated. The same opinion was held by an American scholar, Henry Morris. Although every schoolboy is aware of the evil that Hitler and his National Socialism brought into the world, it is not explained to children at all that the basis for all of this is evolutionary theory. Such an obvious attempt to hide the truth is nothing but a distortion of history. In Mein Kampf, the biological theory is outlined in the chapter of nations and races. Hitler extends the theory of natural selection to natural laws in general, and concludes that humanity is also subject to principles of natural selection. This logic leads him to morally absurd conclusions. Hitler claims that it is against the laws of nature to care for the weak. The seed of a future generation which must inevitably grow more and more deplorable the longer the mockery of nature and her will continues. And the end will be that such a people will someday be deprived of its existence on Earth. A stronger race will draw out the weak. Mankind has grown great in internal struggle, and only in eternal peace does it perish. The Nazi regime forcibly sterilized hundreds of thousands of people deemed handicapped. Tens of thousands of physically and mentally ill people were murdered. Some 17 million Jews, Poles, Russians, and Gypsies were murdered. Even World War I, disabled people were killed. Although Hitler himself was proud of his feats at the front, at the same time, positive eugenics of the birth of Aryan children were encouraged by all means. In reality, the theory of evolution is the doctrine which prepared the ground for the emergence and spread throughout the world of the godless, bloody, illogical system, which still rules the world and claims the lives of millions of innocent people. The postulates of materialism are systematically indoctrinated into the mind of man, turning him into a selfish creature, making him think only of personal gain and the accumulation of material wealth. To disregard the true values of life, the moral commandments set down the mankind by the Almighty Creator. This has led to a loss of meaning of the people's lives. Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher, logician, mathematician, and social activist, characterized Darwin's theory rather precisely: a global, free competition in which victory went to the animals that most resembled successful capitalists. Darwinian competition was not of the limited sort. There were no rules against hidden below the belt. The framework of the law does not exist among animals, nor is war excluded as a competitive method. Now, let's answer the question asked at the beginning. Why are children still being told at school that man evolved from an ape? School is one of the most stable social institutions, the genetic matrix of culture. What a person learns before the age of 12 or 13 will shape their views and attitudes for the rest of their life. Knowing this important feature, the powerful of this world create a human being with new characteristics that make it easier to manipulate their minds. The school should produce a good citizen, worker, and consumer, and not a person who knows what he was born for. After all, a person who has God cannot be ruled. He is free. Therefore, positions of the hypothesis of evolution are erected as dogmas, even if it contradicts the scientific facts. The Lord God has been replaced in the minds of generations by almighty natural selection. The responsibility for this substitution lies to a large extent with scientists as well. After all, one of the duties of science is to bear witness to the truth. The responsibility of a scientist is higher than that of a doctor. The consequences of his actions may affect the lives of millions of people. But to the same extent, this responsibility lies with us, the people. After all, everyone who makes up the society is responsible for society and its development. And by blaming someone for their troubles, people shift the responsibility onto others, essentially refusing to consciously manage their own lives. A society in which people shift their responsibility to others is called a consumer society. It is a society of lies and injustice, but we are able to change all of that. We can build a society in which the truth is valued, where human life is the main value, where everyone is responsible for themselves and society. We can build a creative society where everyone will be able to answer the most important question: who am I? And what is the meaning of life? Thank you for your attention, and now I give the floor to the hosts.
This is a truly shocking information, as we can see the instilling into the public consciousness of Darwin theory was planned by a certain group of stakeholders to make the worldview of people more material. To this day, we are all reaping the fruits of these substitutions, when scientists, for the sake of power, money, and prestige, resort to deception. In this image, we see another of many examples of such deception. The famous skull was obtained by assembling two different remains into a single structure, part of a human skull and the jawbone of an orangutan. According to this model of the skull, many copies of reconstructions and drawings were later made, and more than 500 scientific articles were written. The original of the assembled skull was exhibited in the British Museum.
Another example. This drawing, published in the Illustrated London News of June 24, 1922, was based on only one tooth. However, it was later discovered that this tooth did not belong to a human or even an ape-like creature. Instead, it belonged to an extinct species of pig. As we heard above, these kinds of falsifications, which have no scientific value, are used to control and influence the public consciousness. Fortunately, with the development of genetics, there are new refutations of Darwin theory. What are they? We find out in the film The Quantum of God.
I don't want to believe. I want to know. Carl Sagan.
There is one molecule that is present in every cell of every living being without exception, including in your body as well. It is the molecule of DNA. If you count all the characters in the one volume of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, there are only 750,000 of them, including punctuation marks and spaces. How many such volumes of information do you think can fit in the human genome? And now pay attention. 16,000 volumes of such kind. Yes, DNA is the best information carrier known to humankind. Only 2 grams of DNA can hold all the world's information available digitally. If you unwind all the DNA spirals of your cells and connect them into one string, its length would be 6,000 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Some scientists argue that this structure was formed randomly by itself, and the story goes back to the middle of the 19th century. According to scientists in the mid-19th century, the idea that the DNA molecule could be a carrier of genetic information was just insane. The Czech monk Gregor Johann Mendel discovered the 3 laws of the transmission of inherited traits from parents to offspring and showed them on the example of peace. Among the scientific community at the time, Mendel earned himself the jocular nickname, our botanical mathematician. His reports were met with wariness. Is the monk trying to combine botany with theology? Such fears arose in the community. The scientist suggested the existence of certain material carriers of traits, which he called inherited traits. When he announced his first report, he expected, if not recognition, at least questions and feedback. But the response was again nothing but silence. This happened on February 8, 1865. Before the discovery of the informational nature of heredity, there remained 129 years of scientific inquiry and sometimes violent struggle for the truth. Mendel was the first to experience this confrontation. At that time, all the naturalists were very busy debating Darwin's theory of origin of species, and they had no time for the oddball monk's ideas. Biologists were crossing flies, crossing corn, and observing the external results. And they did not think at all about what was going on at the microscopic, and even more so at the molecular level. In the molecular science of that period, proteins reigned supreme. The Greek name proteins, primary, aroused the awe of the biochemists for this group of molecules, and it was generally accepted that they performed all the main roles in living organisms. Mendel's discoveries were not recognized for the simple reason that he was only a provincial biology teacher, a monk who had not graduated from university. Only 30 years later, 3 biologists, Correns, De Vries, and Chermak, working independently, rediscovered Mendel's principles of inheritance. Today, Johann Mendel is rightly considered the founder of the doctrine of heredity. After Mendel's discovery, a real civil war broke out in biology between supporters of Darwin's theory and those of Mendel's theory. Still, there was one man who trusted only the facts. That man was Morgan. He began with discrepancies in the formation of new combinations that Mendel could not explain. Morgan obtained an experimental explanation of these discrepancies in 1902. His reward was the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the role of chromosomes in heredity. Morgan alone received the prize, but remained committed to the spirit of true science, and he shared it with his young colleagues. Another hypothesis far ahead of science was formed by Nikolai Koltsov in 1927. He made a hypothesis in which he argued that inherited proteins should be recorded in special giant molecules, where each gene should be represented by a segment of this giant molecule, and the molecules themselves should consist of 2 identical strands, 1 double molecule per chromosome. According to Koltsov's idea, every single filament would move to a daughter cell when it divides. Its mirror copy would be synthesized on it. The information recorded in the filament would be reproduced in the mirror copy. In other words, he formulated the matrix principle of reproduction of hereditary molecules, as Koltsov called it, from a molecule to a molecule. He believed that the creation of new, identical, double hereditary molecules would ensure the preservation and continuity in hereditary records. All of the assumptions were anticipations of future scientific progress. He was 30 years ahead of his time. It was not until 1962 that his question was put to rest. Of course, genetics as a science has a difficult fate. It goes a thorny way together with those scientists who serve the truth. But on this path, in conditions of the consumerist format of society, there have always been those who strenuously put sticks in the wheels and hindered the development of science. One of these so-called scientists was Trofim Lysenko, and the period from the 30s to the 60s of the last century was called Lysenkovchina in Soviet science. One can hardly estimate all the harm done to people, and especially to those real scientists who tried to disprove and stop this pernicious phenomenon. Many of them, such as Nikolai Vavilov, Vladimir Stanchinsky, Nikolai Koltsov, and others, paid for it with their lives and could not reach their full potential in science. So, ambitiously promoting his ideas, Lysenko did not care about the irreparable harm caused to science as a whole. His only concern was making a name in scientific circles. He tried to vilify genetics in every possible way, calling it the corrupt wench of imperialism, and saying that Mendel's and Morgan's don't do us any favors. The point of Lysenko's methods was that anything can be re-educated. We don't cull cows, we raise them. That was his scientific role. He believed that wheat could be hardened, spring planting. Cotton could be taught, minting. And potatoes could be made to produce larger tubers, summer planting. He firmly believed this, and genetics and geneticists prevented him from promoting his utopian ideas. Geneticists led by Vavilov entered into controversy with Lysenko's agrobiology, criticizing its scientific findings. First of all, because it was getting less and less concrete, and it could not become part of the world's scientific discourse. The matter even reached Stalin, and Lysenko held a grudge, and an angry man's resentment is dangerous. He can devote his life to searching for and strangling the offenders. Thus began the war between geneticists and Lysenkovics. The first camp consisted of scientists, the second camp consisted of people of the people, such as Trofim Denisovich's first associate, Isaac Present, who wrote hundreds of denunciations and branded genetics a capitalist mutt. History tirelessly demonstrates that repression of scientists occurs when the research interest is replaced by the self-interest of businessmen in science or by ideological doctrine, and persecution of real scientists marks the dark time of society. However, as time passes and reality dispels misconceptions, recognition is given to those who did research out of interest, not out of a desire to build a career. It would be nice if people could learn from history and get out of the vicious circle whereby a scientist has to end up in prison or die on the way to recognition. Thanks to the efforts of Lysenko, that scoundrel of science, many real scientists were arrested and later killed. Lysenko and his henchmen cleared the way to power and thus set back the development of science for decades. But the truth won. This victory was marked by awarding the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine to Watson and Crick in 1962. Their work on DNA put an end to the debate about the structure and function of this molecule. However, this debate could have been settled as far back as the 1930s, thanks to the discoveries of Nikolai Koltsov. Science rose to a new level. New horizons in understanding the non-randomness and meaningfulness of the structure of living matter opened up in front of it. And the next step was the discovery of the duality of the set of hereditary information. It turned out that there is a protected part in this medium, a monomorphic part of the genome, which puts an end to Darwin's theory of evolution of some species of living beings to others. This means that all species exist unchanged from the moment of their creation. Only their adaptability to environmental conditions changes. Russian scientist Yuri Petrovich Altukhov, geneticist, academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, founder of the Soviet School of Population Genetics, has been openly saying since the 1970s that Darwinism and Neo-Darwinism have proven to be untenable, unscientific, and work only with species adaptation, and further evolution is impossible. The academician argued that 80% of the genes in each species are so important for life that even the slightest change in them is lethal. This is confirmed by studies of the genomes of dozens and hundreds of species of insects, birds, reptiles, mammals. Making statements about the inconsistency of Darwin's theory among Darwinist fanatics is like waving a red rag in front of a bull. All the power of the opposition was unleashed on Yuri Petrovich and his associates.
When we did this, I was 34 years old. I foolishly thought that was it. We were done with the Darwinism. And that everyone would start applauding us and they would give us the Nobel Prize. I thought so. But then I realized they wouldn't give me anything. I have to keep working to consolidate it. And that's why, in fact, I wrote about the same thing. I believe that these 2 points should be further substantiated by using new data. What are the 2 points that didn't exist before us? The first is the genetic stability of population systems. This structure is considered evolutionary optimal, but we have shown that it is not. You see? In other words, we have undermined the main forces of Neo-Darwinism by showing that this structure is stable. And the second point is that we have discovered the genes that code for species characteristics. We were also the first to discover it.
History repeats itself. The truth is always confronted by rigidity and dogmatism, and this is a consequence of the consumerist format of society in which we exist. Some people come to science not for the sake of understanding the truth, but for the sake of gaining power and material benefits. And it is this mass of selfish people that becomes the wall against which the most courageous and real seekers of the truth break down. Yes, history repeats itself. In 1975, the German biophysicist Fritz Albert Popp made the discovery that all living organisms emit weak light. This light is very weak and the human eye cannot see it. Only equipment detects it. This phenomenon was called biophotons. At the same time, Popp discovered that the cells of the whole organism form a single energy field, within which the exchange of information by means of biophotons takes place. And the source of biophotons and the place where the information coming from the sun is stored is DNA. In his words,
DNA has billions of times more storage capacity than today's technology suggests, because DNA memory is based on the storage of light information.
Wolfgang Klimek, a German professor of computer science at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, also attributed a leading role to biophotons in the information exchange between cells in the body. He drew the following conclusion.
Several million processes per second occur in a single cell, accurately and with unmistakable precision. Biophotons communicating coherently with each other and thus transmitting orders to initiate certain cellular processes could more accurately explain intercellular processes. In the body of each adult, 10 million cells die per second. This loss is constantly replenished by the birth of new cells. Such a process is only possible with a universal communication system operating at speeds comparable to electromagnetic waves.
And such a communication system is biophotons, which travel at the speed of light. Popp never received the Nobel Prize, for which he was nominated by the University of Marburg, where the scientist was working at the time. The publicizing of his discovery suddenly caused a flood of complaints from his colleagues, up to the demand to examine the scientist in a psychiatric hospital, after which he was dismissed from the university. Eventually, the scientific world recognized the weak photon radiation of living organisms as well as non-living ones. But the scientist was never acknowledged in the scientific community. Disciples of Fritz Albert Popp conducted the studies again, and once more they proved the presence of biophotons. The discovery of biophotons was later applied in determining the shelf life, freshness, quality of food and medications, and bacterial contamination. Orders for research came not only from the state, but also from world-renowned food brands. However, despite practical success, the classical scientific world treated Fritz Albert Popp's work as esoteric nonsense, just as his colleagues once did. At the same time, lots of advanced scientists recognized Popp and called him a highly competent scientist, fearlessly walking through the undeveloped lands of science. This is another example of consumerism in science. Russian scientist Peter Garyaev, as well as his German colleagues, highly appreciated the discovery of Fritz Albert Popp. He continued to develop the topic of biophotons in his scientific works. Under his leadership, linguistic wave genetics was developed. However, his path in science was difficult and thorny as well. He made research work, inventions, and experiments at universities in Russia and Canada. And every time the group of scientists he led came close to successfully completing a project, it was disbanded and the results were ignored. For example, in Toronto, their unique and expensive experimental equipment was simply taken away from them at the urgent termination of the contract after successful completion of the work. What scared the sponsors of the work so much? Back in 1990, Vladimir Poponin and Peter Garyayev conducted an experiment on the direct influence of human DNA on physical objects. According to the authors, the devices recorded the effect of some new energy substances. The essence of the experiment of Poponin and Garyayev was as follows. The scientists studied the effect of DNA on particles of light, photons. In the course of the experiment, they used glass tubes from which they pumped out all the air. Despite the fact that a vacuum was created in the tube, photons still remained there. They were detected by special sensors and chaotically occupied the entire space of the tube. Then they placed a sample of human DNA in the tube, and the photons suddenly began to line up in an orderly structure. Some invisible force was impacting them. And another discovery awaited the scientists. When they removed the DNA from the tube, the photons remained the order set by the DNA molecule. In his article, Poponin would later write,
"My colleagues and I have to accept the working hypothesis that in the process of experiment, some kind of action of new field structure has been excited."
They decided to call this phenomenon the DNA phantom effect. The conclusion that has been drawn is that human DNA is capable of influencing the world around us at a quantum level. The discovery of the DNA phantom effect is one of the most significant discoveries in modern human science. It shows that everything that exists is interconnected. Peter Garyayev continued the work of his predecessors, Professor Alexander Gurevich, Alexander Lubishchev, and Vladimir Beklemishev, who gave a positive answer to the question about the radiation of light and sound by chromosomes. In Garyayev's experiments, it was found that acoustic fields can acquire the structure of solitons and transmit gene wave information at a distance. Solitons are not usual waves. They behave like particles. Solitons can exist for a very long time, preserving their structure. They can be energized by the environment. Using ultrasensitive devices, 4 researchers, Garyayev, Berezin, Komisarov, Andriankin, established that soliton waves originate in DNA strands, pass through them, like through lines, and read the hereditary information. DNA contains not only the program for protein synthesis, but also the spatial structure of the organism as a whole, where and when cells divide. These changes are carried out by commands from solitons. They carry wave information to various structures not only in their own cell, but also transmit the information to the DNA of neighboring cells. Due to this, the structures develop exactly according to the plan and in coordination with other cells. But who gives them this command? The brain?
In the early stage of development, animals do not yet have a brain, explained Peter Garyayev, and plants do not have it all. But this does not prevent them from developing according to the program. We have come to a conclusion that about half of the information about the development of biosystems cannot be recorded in DNA. This information is stored by an intelligence which is far more powerful than human intelligence.
A group of scientists, led by Garyayev, created a generator of soliton processes that develop in DNA. The soliton generator was named after Fermi Pasta Ulam, FPU, who discovered soliton waves. Human speech was introduced in the solitons created by the generator. As a result, artificially created solitons as if came to life and influenced the development of the organism similarly to solitons born by DNA. What were these magic words? Peter Garyaev answered the question this way.
Well, those were ordinary words, but arranged in a certain order which gave the phases of unusual rhythm. And most importantly, they were said in a special state of consciousness as during prayer. If these conditions were observed, the solution acquired healing processes regardless of the language. We tried that in Russian, English, and German, and the results were similar.
And in control experiments, when meaningless phrases were uttered, the result was zero. It turned out that DNA not only radiates but also receives information at a level inaccessible to modern devices.
Peter Garyaev concluded an experiment that was done after him in many laboratories and almost always with the same result.
It turns out that our DNA molecules are antennas. And not only DNA, but also proteins, because they contain metals, metal atoms, which are a kind of antennas directed to space. Some kind of controlling cosmic information is being received. Why? There are simple experiments, for instance with frog eggs. If they are placed in so-called permalloy bombs, that is, in metal-shielded cages, that have all conditions for normal development of cells, except for one thing. The external electromagnetic environment is extremely reduced and distorted. It means there is anomalous electromagnetic environment. Only gravitational field remains unchanged. Everything else is distorted there. Well, maybe neutrinos also pass through, and it turns out that such embryos, such eggs in permalloy bombs, turn into ugly creatures. Do you see the point? It means that the external electromagnetic environment is absolutely essential for us. It creates a kind of wave metabolism, a wave regulation that comes from space.
To put it simple, in an ordinary metal chamber, normal tadpoles appear from eggs. Later, they turn into frogs. In the permalloy chamber, ugly creatures hatch, none of which then reach a frog. In other words, the idea of wave genetics is that the genetics apparatus builds the organism with the help of acoustic and electromagnetic waves of different range. Moreover, it not only receives them from outside, but also generates them itself. It is experimentally proved that DNA generates radio emissions and laser beams, which build information holograms. It means that cells of the embryo, having received information by waves, create a particular blueprint which indicates where and how a leg, an eye, a nose, etc. is supposed to grow.
These experiments show that living matter is not self-sufficient without external impact. This means, first of all, that all living matter is a product of deliberate and conscious impact of information on the matter. Who forms, sends, and directs this information? Who invented this plan by which all living things exist in this world? Do you remember these words? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through Him all things began to be, and without Him nothing began to be what began to be. To sum up, it's safe to say, with the words of Peter Garyaev, that DNA is a kind of universal Esperanto, where information is recorded for all and it is clear to all biosystems. Any biosystem contains DNA, genes, wave DNA in different quantities, which are in fact divine texts. In that very DNA we are written as in a hologram. This is so, friends. There is a huge amount of information in small structures, where everything is in its place. It's enough to change it. And all parameters change. As of today, this is already a known fact too. Don't we currently know how to transfer information from a healthy body to a sick one? Haven't such experiments been conducted? They have been, and quite successfully. This is really so. However, it's impossible in the consumerist format. I mean, all of us suffer and do not get a great number of benefits which we could obtain already today, just because all of us, friends, are very stupid creatures. Maybe it's time to become smarter. After all, this is really so. In other words, we exist in the consumerist format. Like monkeys, you see, it's like the experiment, monkeys with bananas. You know, when monkeys were placed in one room, bananas were put there, and when a monkey tried to reach for those bananas, people poured cold water on it, and this reflex was established. It's a well-known experiment. If anyone is interested, you can find it on the internet and look it up, friends. We won't repeat it. But we are, indeed, like those monkeys. We were once told that a slave is a slave, and he cannot change anything, so until today, we continue to exist in our slavish position and do not change anything, while we can really be happy, really free and healthy, and look the way we want to. What else do we need?
Sometimes it seems to us that humankind is so far along the path of scientific achievement that the hour is not far off when absolutely everything in the world will be explained by science. In reality, science still stands helplessly before the many unsolved mysteries of the universe. Science still does not know yet what electricity, time, space, and gravity is, and what life and death are. The current consumerist format of society will never allow science to come close to answering these questions.
Yes, Alex. The consumerist format is like a cancer affecting all areas of society. As you and I have heard today, even in such an area as science, an absurd theory is being imposed on the public consciousness that man is just an intelligent animal that came into existence by chance and is condemned to a life governed by instincts. And the facts that suggest a more noble creation of man are stubbornly ignored. It feels like the world has gone mad. What does science, which is supposed to study the inner world of a human being and help them become happy, have to say about this? Diana, you have the floor.
Yes, you are absolutely right. The consumerist world is a world of absurdity and madness. You don't believe it? Let's see what Sigmund Freud claims. The moment a man asks about the meaning and value of life, he is sick, since objectively neither has any existence. And he is one of the founders of a science in which people seek answers to their most pressing questions. How to find oneself? What is the meaning of my life? How to gain happiness? What is true love? And does it actually exist? Is modern psychology able to give true answers to the most important questions for each person? How did it happen that the science of the soul turned away from God? Is it possible to come to love without God and without the soul? We will discuss all of this with you on June 13th, 2023, in the 31st episode of Kaleidoscope of Facts, Part 3.
Thank you, Diana. We look forward to Part 3 of the Kaleidoscope of Facts on June 13th. Dear friends, we want to thank you for your support, your attention, your questions and comments. We'll be glad to know what information was particularly interesting, and we'll welcome your suggestions as to what other topics you want us to be considered in the third issue. We also want to thank all the scientists who shared their research with us and all those who are behind the scenes. It is only thanks to your enthusiasm, hard work, and solidarity that we are able to create such projects as Kaleidoscope of Facts. It is a great work, which at first glance is not noticeable, but which holds everything together. We thank everyone who participated in the process, from researching the information to creating scripts and videos. Special thanks to our narrators, translators, and simultaneous interpreters, designers, technical support. Thank you all very, very much.
A huge thank you to everyone. Our Kaleidoscope of Facts is coming to an end. Before saying goodbye, I would like to introduce the second part of the episode and quote the words of the German physicist and founder of quantum theory, Max Planck. For believers, God is in the beginning. And for physicists, he's at the end of all considerations. The second part, which will be released on May 14, will not be standard. It will be a film, which we are happy to present to your attention. I propose to watch the trailer of this film.
Today, many outstanding physicists who consider themselves to be physicists, they say that God doesn't exist. They look into the depths of this world, so to say, and see no God there. But true physicists who are really into science, they eventually understand and come precisely to God, to an understanding that, pardon me, it is possible to put everything in its place like this, only having boundless wisdom. It won't just happen by chance. Moreover, today, physicists, so far manipulate entire planets and mountains, delving into the micro world. What we've come to are macro objects, even though we consider them micro. But when modern science will be able to look deep into what the energies weaving the fabric of this world consist of, they will understand that apart from God, there is nothing. Everything else is an illusion. And basically, for this humanity, it is not far off if they want this.